Welcome to the Coda podcast. I'm Roo from Roo Films, and today I'll be speaking with James from Tracey Films. After successfully building a wedding photography business that allowed him to leave his job as a police officer, James then took the bold step to transition fully over to wedding videography, effectively having to start over again at the height of his photography business success. In today's episode, we'll dive into how James achieved such a remarkable business transformation, the role of mentorship in fast-tracking his growth as a filmmaker, and the lessons he's learned along the way. James, welcome to the Coda podcast. So good to have you on.
Good evening. How are you?
Very well, thank you, mate. Now, you've had a very similar background in this industry to me, haven't you? You started off as a wedding photographer and you moved over to a successful career as a wedding videographer. So in this chat, it'd be nice to go into that kind of transition and how you made that move. Let's start off with some quick fire questions to get started, shall we? So talking from a videographer point of view now, let's forget your sordid past briefly, which we will go back into it. But as your career as a videographer, how many weddings do you shoot each year on average now?
On average for video, it's 25 to 30. So I aim for 30, but anywhere in between that kind of works for me. And
is that, are you fitting in any photo amongst that these days at all?
No, it's just I switched fully to video last year, so I shot my last photo job over 12 months ago now. So it's just video. In fact, I only had one last year, so really over the last 2 years, it's mainly video now. Well, it's only video now.
Yeah, so you've made the full transition. And that's interesting as well, because I feel like a lot of people, when they do make the move, they kind of dabble in both a little bit. But was your just heart set on completely moving over? Was that the way you wanted to move your business?
Not originally, not when I first started getting interested in sort of the film side. The idea was to do 50-50, just to give myself an extra sort of revenue stream, if you like. I sort of read the room a little bit that things were going to move towards video. So I thought, well, if I can just offer that, then I've got 2 bites at each client that comes through the door. And then as soon as I sort of started going down the video route and learning more about it and doing it, I realised I enjoyed it a lot more. And I think I'd have been 6-7 years in photos by then. So I decided that I actually enjoyed the video side more, and I was being able to charge more quite quickly on the video, which obviously we'll probably come to, but I think that sort of forced my hand a little bit as well. So it just sort of accidentally moved into video, but it's kind of worked out nicely.
So the market almost told you, the market kind of forced you into it almost, kind of thing.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it was part of the inspiration to do it was I was working with more and more videographers as a photographer, and you sit down when you're having a bite to eat and you chat about everything, and money sometimes crops up. And I was starting to find that more often the videographers were earning not just a bit, but quite a lot more. Yeah. And you're like, oh, well, these are the same clients that have booked me, so they've obviously got a budget. So maybe what I could have taken away is I could charge more for photography, but it's kind of got me interested there in the video side. And then, as you know, because you did it yourself, once you go down that dark, dirty path, there's no coming back.
There is literally no coming back. But talking of prices, great segue into my next question. What are the packages that you offer at the minute? So what are your deliverables and how much are you charging?
Yeah, so I'll try and keep this as simple as I can. I have 3 packages that I offer. So what I'd class like as an entry level, then there's the one I want to sell, and then there's the bells and whistles that just has everything stuck on for that one person a year that just likes to spend money. And the entry level, everything has got full ceremony, full speeches. The entry level has got a 10-minute film. The one I want to sell is a 2 to 3 minute trailer, 15, 18-minute film. And then the bells and whistles has an Instagram teaser, a doc edit, everything from the day, and ceremony and speeches. And that's entries 2.5. The mid package that I want to sell is 3. And then I think it's 4 for the top package. And like I said, I maybe do one of them a year. But that's for like within 2 hours of my house. Once we start going a bit further, it basically all jumps up £1,000. So if I'm going down south or Oxford, London or wherever, the mid package jumps to 4 and everything comes with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so do you have kind of different brochures that you send out depending on the inquiry that's come in? You've kind of almost got like a dynamic structure to it.
Yeah. A bit, I'm sure lots of people use Studio Ninja. The same thing, the inquiry comes in, they get an autoresponder, and then I have 4 brochures. of varying different price points. So there's one of them in there that was last year's pricing, which was lower, which I've just left in case, because obviously the market changes.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty flexible with prices. For a January inquiry, I might send a lower price because it's supply and demand, isn't it? If there's not as many weddings in January. For a bank holiday weekend in August, I might send the top $4,000 price out and just try that a couple of times. I'm pretty fluid with it, but the general one that I'm selling the most is the $3,000 package, which is the 2 to 3 minutes, 15 to 18 speeches ceremony. That's my main one.
Yeah, that's a really good package, isn't it? That's like my biggest package kind of is as a standard is that the same kind of setup. And I feel your longer film is your accountability, so you can put pretty much everything in that. Then you get to be creative with that shorter film. You're giving them the full speeches and ceremonies, so they get to see everything. So there's nothing that they're going to be asked for to put in. It basically gives you freedom for that shorter film to be quite creative, doesn't it? And I know that's quite important to you, isn't it? The kind of creativity in your shorter films specifically. I feel looking through your work, you're constantly trying to push things a little bit in terms of how wedding films can be structured. Is that a fair assumption, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you can sometimes shoot for something and miss, can't you? And that happens. But I like to try and do something that perhaps isn't necessarily the same as, I'm not trying to say everybody's doing the same thing, but I'm trying to do something that's slightly more what I like, rather than perhaps what always the sort of market demands. And I know that narrows my market down, but I just hope that then when that 10% or whatever it is of people that like it find it, then I'm much more nailed on to book that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when you find your people, they're pretty much locked in because you really are kind of you're appealing to a niche almost in a way.
Yeah. That's and I kind of want to go more that way. Like I sort of want to double down on it and go even more niche over the next sort of year, 2 years. Push it, see how far I can go. But obviously, market forces are also in play, and they're saying, "Hey, there's less weddings and more people, so you have to be sensible."
And is that just kind of like you want to be different to the market that's out there, or are there certain things that you just want to integrate into your work?
It comes more from my side, I think, rather than I'm not sort of pushing back so much on what is out there. It's more just the way I shot photos is I shot photos what I was interested in, and that's how I found it more enjoyable. If I was just doing basically what I wanted, and it's kind of the same when it's come to the film side. I've sort of we all start out and you sort of imitate what everybody else is doing just to get a feeling for what you're doing, and then eventually sort of start to find your own voice a little bit. And I think it's just doing something I like. And I'm in a position where there's just me in the business. There isn't two of us having to earn and stuff. So my wife has a job. I have that flexibility to trial things because when I'm not like the sole earner or anything in the house. So I do have a little bit more freedom to try stuff. So I'm aware I can do that. And like I said, sometimes it works and sometimes I'll put something together and I'll be like, oh no, that's dreadful. Stop.
Because I feel like it's such a buzzword when people say their influences are kind of like film and TV. And a lot of people say that. And I see it quite a lot of like kind of Twitter entries, people saying that they're influenced by TV and film. And then you see the work and I think, well, I don't really see where that influence is coming through. But when I look at your work, I think it's very evident that you have like kind of influences from TV and kind of like and film and the way you're structuring things. For example, I've seen there's a film of yours I've seen where the prep section of the day is cutting in between the bride and the groom getting ready, but it's all quite fast cuts and it's all super tight shots and you're honing in on details and you're not really showing those wide shots, but it really has that kind of like intensity to it that you kind of see in like TV series and stuff like that. For example, like The Bear. That's kind of, and I know you've mentioned it to me before, that is an influence of yours, isn't it? But is that what you're going through with that feeling, with that kind of the way you're structuring that film? Is that intentional that you kind of bring those influences in?
I'm sure everybody knows this. Anybody who knows me knows now that I did a year with Jeff Wood, and Jeff's heavily influenced by cinema and film, and I've always liked his work. So it kind of just made sense that when I started to learn from him, he was like, just watch lots of TV and premium sort of the American-y top tier stuff and movies, and he was like, sometimes there's just little things, and you'll see it and you think, oh, I could try that in a film.
Yeah.
And again, often things don't work, or you'll have an idea in your head and the wedding doesn't lend itself to it. But you can sometimes sit with the edit and think, right, I can make this slightly different. And it's perhaps, I think the Bear's a good shout, because I think that's influenced me probably the most this year. Not the frenetic, hectic chaos. If anyone's seen the show, it's quite stressful, which in itself can sometimes be the morning of a wedding. That can have its moments depending on the type of wedding it is. So the two have got that in common. But you can sort of do those faster edits. But I think the big thing that I took from that this year is the tight shots.
Yes.
So building the story from it just being tight and almost pulling back. So you're revealing stuff slowly. And the intention is just to keep the viewer interested. Like, oh, what's this? Where's it going? If we can match cut between prep, the venue being set, and the groom, that just gives you something different to look at. Because we all know what's going to happen in a wedding film. They're going to get married. So if I can find any way...
You hope.
I've not had one yet. You kind of hope that you can just give something to the viewer that will intrigue them enough for them to stick around. Because you like, whoever you're shooting for, they're going to watch it. They're going to love it because they're in it. Their friends and family are in it. It's their day. But if I could make something that appeals to somebody who doesn't know that couple, who can still sit through 2-3 minutes and enjoy it, that's kind of like success. So yeah, if I can take anything, I mean, when I was with Jeff, I'm watching some of his shots and they were like borderline Spielbergian, these sort of wide movement shots that he has, and lots of stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, I dare do that. it's really bold. But like there's just little bits from, I don't think you're going to look in and go, oh yeah, I can see he stole that from episode 7 of The Bear, but there's little bits you can see. And whenever I can get a behind the scenes of a show, and you can hear the director, or you can hear the editor talking about their choices and why they did it, often then it's a lot more relatable to what we're doing, because ultimately we're just editing or you're shooting. So, and you can sometimes think, oh, well, I'll apply what they were saying into the way I've shot that. If there's movement in the scene, people are moving from A to B in the wedding, kind of makes sense to have movement with the camera.
Yeah.
Because she's sort of mimicking what's happening. But of course, that then means you probably need a gimbal to keep it nice and smooth, or because I'm not that smooth with a handheld camera. I'm okay at standing still. Once we start moving, it's bouncing all over the place. So it is like, there is a bit more kit sometimes needed for it, but I think it can make for a slightly more dynamic edit. But I totally agree with what you said about the accountability on the 15 to 18 and the speech ceremony. No one's going to come back and go, did you have that gag from my dad? You've got all that. And the 15 to 18 minute feature, I try and make that as engaging and entertaining. I try and layer the ceremony so it's in amongst prep, so you're building to something rather than it just being sort of plopped in its own section. But ultimately, that is pretty much 70-80% of what I've shot will end up going into that, because I want them to have as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what cameras are you using?
Well, I was shooting Sony when I was a Nikon shooter on stills, and then I moved to Sony when the A9 came out, which is still a beast of a camera.
Oh yeah.
For stills, silent shutter and everything, which I'm still astonished that there aren't more silent shutters around. That was like 6-7 years ago that came out. It was a great camera. So I had that, and I had an A7 III, and then one of my A7 IIIs died, and I replaced it with an A7 IV, because I don't shoot a lot in slow motion. So the A7 IV does have a 4K slow motion setting, but it's cropped.
Yeah.
I don't tend to... I shoot all the day at like 25p, so apart from the couple stuff. Yeah, I never do it. Just because it forces me not... I use a lot of the ambient audio, so I generally don't slow stuff down because it... obviously you can't use the audio. And I like the sort of the energy that you get from it being in sort of real time. I'm not a huge fan of slowing stuff down, just because I think it's like, again, you go back to TV and film, it's used for a very specific purpose. You'll watch, I'm trying to, off the top of my head, like, I'm going to pick a show nobody's probably watched, but have you seen The Handmaid's Tale, where season 2, the first...
Love it. Oh, it's so good. I miss it. When's it back? Bring it back.
I think they're shooting it now, so next year. The second season where they're going to the gallows and they're dragging all the handmaids into the gallows because they've done a mini rebellion and they're going to...
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert, if anyone's not seen it. They take them into the gallows at the baseball stadium and they don't know they've been taken there. There's all the dogs barking, they're in the vans and it's all very stressful and it's all very quick. And then it has these just a little moments of slow motion where she's... cuts in on her and she's sort of trying to take in what's going on, and it has real impact when it's used like that, as opposed to if they just do like a long sequence with it, you can sort of zone out a bit, can't you? So I think like if I was to use it in a wedding, it would be for very simple moments, but because of the crop factor I tend not to shoot. It's only if something was happening that I was like, oh yeah, I really need to get this, I might switch it, and I shoot 50mm, so it's fairly easy to do. But no, generally I tend to shoot 25, probably 95% of the day. So
and you say 50mm, that's your main lens, is it?
Yeah, just a Zeiss Luxia manual focus 50mm. It looks really, really nice. It's dead cheap secondhand. I think they're like 300 quid. They're like 800 quid new, so it's a great like little 50mm to pick up. It is manual focus, but I prefer that generally anyway. Still don't fully trust autofocus, even though it's much better. But I have like 3 A7 IVs and an A7C2, which is like the mini version of an A7 IV. So they're what I carry at the minute.
So are you using 4 cameras on a day, or is one of those like a backup?
In theory, one's a backup. So there's the main one that I shoot. I love my percentages here, don't I? The main one that I shoot 90% of the day, that's like on my hip and I'm walking around. And then I have a gimbal, which I might use for like 6 or 7 shots. And then I'll just have like a B cam for the speeches and ceremony. But when I'm doing the ceremony, I've started to find that I'll have like, and again, we'll probably come on to how I'll set the ceremony up, but I've started to find that I'm sort of running 4 cameras sometimes, which it's a bit of overkill, but it's also a bit of, I'm just covering my back. Because I've got it, it's in the bag, I'm like, let's just use it.
Yeah, talk us through your ceremony setup then. I'm always interested in how people are handling this part of the day.
So I try and follow the 180 rule, which I found makes life really simple for me. I found when I first moved over to video, I was like, well, where do I put the other cameras? Like, here's the bride and groom, and I was putting them at like stupid low angles or miles away or like really, and they just all look terrible. And I didn't want to use any of them. And then again, when I started to watch more TV and film, you're looking at how basically like 2 shots are set up and conversations are set up, and it's like, well, essentially the ceremony and the speeches to a degree are like a conversation, aren't they? It's one person talking to another. In the ceremony, they respond. Speeches generally not. And it just seemed really simple that you just draw a line somewhere in the room and make sure your cameras sit behind it. So for the ceremony, I'll generally have 45 degrees, a 50mm on the groom, 45 degrees the other side of 50mm on the bride. I'll have a monopod with probably an 85 and again, I don't use monopod often, but in the ceremony I do need it to be still because obviously the other cameras are on tripods. And I can use that then if there's a reader gets up, if the bride and groom shift position, I can always then at least have a camera on them. But I also use the 85 then for a lot of over-the-shoulder stuff. So when they're doing their vows, if I can get around quite easily, I want to be over the shoulder of the speaker.
Yeah.
And then hold that shot so I've got a little bit of reaction, go back to the other side, get theirs, and then you can cut sort of between the two. So you've almost got this much more dynamic sort of exchange. And then I'll use a digital push-in sometimes on that as well to like emphasize the moment. So,
So were you at the front of the ceremony for this setup? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm talking civil ceremony where we generally have space and stuff at the front. I will then leave a 20mm on my gimbal at the back as a safety. 1, to get the bride as she walks past for a bit of a money shot.
Yeah.
And 2, just in case something goes horrifically wrong with all the other cameras. But generally, aside from her walking in, of which if we're talking the 180 rule, my lines change then, that's the length of the thing. We're all on the same side then. Once they get to the front, the line changes. It comes to where essentially the table is. I tend not to cut back to that unless, like, you know, people have just stood up and blocked off cameras. The registrar stood in the way or something like that. Yeah. It's just in case, and then often end up deleting most of that footage rather than storing tons and tons of gigabytes of data for no reason.
Yeah, because that rear camera would be breaking the 180 rule, wouldn't it, based on your setup at the front? So that's why you don't want to keep it in. Because I always someone mentioned that to me before about the semi, like breaking the 180-degree rule with the aisle camera. But I feel it's fine because you've got guests there, you're almost cut into their view of it, even though you switch around. So like, whereas the groom would be in the left of the frame, bride in the right, you cut to that rear angle, then the groom's in the right and the bride's in the left. But you're getting the guest perspective, so it kind of feels all right. But it's a good excuse to use it, mate, if you don't want to get down that aisle. And they don't want
it's just it just simplifies for me. I found it was just easier to go, here's a line, that camera can go there, that camera can go there. I don't have to overthink it. I've now got essentially the same shot on both. That is just backside covering. And there's some, for church ceremonies, I'll generally shoot all from the back, but I might try and get a camera at the front if they'll allow me. If you have to break the rule, you have to break the rule. It's, that's what they're there for.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with breaking it. I'm just trying to do it because it partly makes my life easy, just in the edit as well.
It's kind of giving yourself almost limitations to stop the decision overload almost. So you kind of, put some rules in place for yourself just to make your whole creative process that little bit easier. I think that's a great kind of practice in general through the whole way of shooting, isn't it? Put certain things in place. Like what the main one for me that I did was shooting primes, because shooting a zoom, I've got too much decision. Like I end up paralyzed by it.
I used to have a zoom when I was a photographer, and the paralyzed by indecision is just the perfect phrase for it. The amount of times that you'd be in between and something would be happening and you're missing it because I don't love that focal length. If I've got a 35-85, I just move 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. It suddenly becomes second nature. And it's just the same thing with, like, same for the speeches. I do the exact same thing. Draw a line, all the cameras stay one side of it. One on the speaker, one on the people being spoken about. So generally, I have that Tamron 70 to 180. It's not quite a 70 to 200.
Yes, got the same one. It's brilliant.
Dirt cheap zoom lens that looks really, really good, and that gives me a little bit of flexibility to go tighter if I need to be, a little bit wider, and then I'll sort of generally have an 85 on the other side on the speaker, and then I've got that I can either go to 70 or I can push in if I need to. But I don't do what I know you guys do, where you'll move the cameras around so you have like an A cam and a B cam. I just leave them in position. I just worry about that when I'm multi-camming them later. And then I'll just have a safety wide, like a 20mm at the back, which might even be an iPhone in the next wedding, but that's something we can. I've got one of the iPhone 16s, and the ProRes stuff is really good, but then the file would be enormous, and I don't know. I'm just playing with that.
It's that time of year where a load of videographers want an excuse to buy a new iPhone, say they're going to put it into their workflow. Aaron Kenny, if you're listening, I'm talking to you right now, mate.
I was about to say, I think the kids say, "I feel seen." Does that sound right?
Yes.
My mental gymnastics to justify buying that iPhone 16, but I could use it for all this stuff. And
it shoots log, don't you know?
It shoots log. It does grade. It does grade incredibly well. I've got to say, I didn't have my camera on me. I announced a cake cut just a couple of weddings ago, and the cake cut just happened really quickly. And my camera was in the room, and I was like, I could make everybody wait. Or I just thought, I don't love cake cut anyway, so I whipped out the iPhone, and of course everybody else was shooting an iPhone, so no one cared. And just shot it on the iPhone, got back and graded it, and it, other than the depth of field, which it's cake cut, I don't think anyone's super fussed about that. You couldn't tell, so totally justified. If anyone wants to go and buy an iPhone 16, you totally can.
Yeah, exactly. A tax deductible iPhone 16, go knock yourself out. But joking aside, as a safety angle at the back, I'm getting my A7 IV at the back there, and I'm putting it on like a 24mm, and I'm cranking it to like F6 or something. It might as well be an iPhone at that point. Let's be honest.
Serious. I mean, you wouldn't shoot that in ProRes. There is a setting to shoot it. So you can grade it, but it's just in like H.264 or H.265. So the file comes down. And ultimately, you could just stick that on the, I think it's 15mm or 24mm, whichever you prefer. Stick that on a tripod at the back. Just let it roll. You can just plug a Samsung T5 into it and just record direct to that if you want. For what you're going to use those cutaways every now and again, and it's, I think it's 1,100 quid for the iPhone 16 Pro. You've probably got what have you got, an A7 III at the back, which is still over £1,000.
Yeah.
True. And you can use it as a phone and go on Instagram with it. So it's even more useful than your camera.
Yeah. And those inner city weddings where you want to keep your gear down, like you could go with a 2-camera setup and an iPhone, couldn't you? And destinations, like you're gonna have your phone with you anyway. But yeah. All right. I've convinced myself. I'm buying one.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, sorry to Mrs. Rue is spending more money. I apologise.
Cool. Right, and audio. What are you using for that?
So I'm on the Instamics, which I'm wearing here.
Representing.
Anybody listening on Spotify, that's a waste of time, isn't it? But so I'm mainly using Instamics. I've got 6 of them, and of course, no wedding videographer would be a real wedding videographer if they didn't have an army of the Sonys. I think Absolutely. I've got seven of them, and of course the Token. I know you love this. The Token Zoom F2. That's your favourite piece of kit that was ever released.
Don't get me started. So, what are you? I'm going to talk about the F2 anyway. So, in what circumstances do you crack out the F2? Is that when you want to hide a lav on someone, or do you do you always use it?
No. It's I bought one when they came out just to see because it had float. So I was like, I like the idea of that. And I think it was one of the first ones that had float tech. And I, a bit like you, had a few issues with it, sort of turning itself off. Yeah. Couldn't really rely on it. There was a clicking when you'd move. You've kind of got to wrap the wire around and it's fiddly. So I tend to only use that if I want to hide it on someone for the ceremony. So for whatever reason, all my other stuff might not just work. Outdoor, it's easy to put a dead cat on that. I tend to find they're a little smaller, so it's not as big a footprint out for outdoor weddings. But generally, I mean, how many outdoor weddings have we had this year? Like 2 between all of us. So it's not really seen a lot of action this year. And of course, I'm now fully aware the RooDogs are in like circulation. And come on.
I didn't even pay him, guys.
No, the RooDogs are out there, so they're a bit of a solution for the Sonys because obviously they're a bit susceptible, aren't they, to win. But I generally use the Sony as a backup, and because I equally, like yourself, you can tell I'm a long-time listener. I hate the clip as well. I just tend to hide it in the pocket and accept that there's a bit of a quality loss because that's my backup. And then the Instamic, they're a bit chunkier. But I can usually hide them under the flower, just under the lapel. So they're pretty decent from the win there. But they're already. I mean, I've sent you a comparison clip, and to be honest, I'm not paid to do this, but on my Instagram feed today, Instamic shared a comparison between the Sony and the Instamic from a wedding I did with a bride speaking and a groom speaking. So you've got a male and female voice, and you can hear that it is a little better on the Instamic, and I think it's. Is it sufficiently better that you should all go out and drop the kit that you love? Probably not, but I've got used to using Instamic, and I think once you're working with something you like, and I know the quality is a bit better, but equally at the same time I've had to use Sony sometimes when a random speaker stands up or they've put the microphone down or something like that, and they're fine, aren't they? They're not like no clients ever come back and complain. So.
Yeah, I can't believe you didn't use the Instamic. You used so the Instamics, to kind of explain, because I don't know if that many people know about them, but they're kind of, to explain the form factor, they're almost like a smaller version of an AirPod case, aren't they?
Yeah.
That's the kind of form factor, almost like a pill, I'd guess.
Yeah.
Which is, so how would you position that on the groom? Because that's the one thing that's put me off the Instamics. I know the sound quality is great. They're 32-bit float as well, aren't they? But the form factor is just, it seems quite hard to position it.
They're a bit chunky. So if you think they're like double the thick, it feels like they're double the thickness of a Sony. For anybody that's got a Sony, they'll be able to get an idea. They're about a quarter of the size in length, so they're a lot shorter, but they're a bit chunkier. And if where the lapel pulls forward, if the flower's there, I usually just tuck it under, and then the magnet comes this side under the flower. So it's got a
magnet. It's got a magnet to attach.
Yeah. So I was putting it next to the flower, but obviously if you can hide something, I want it out the way. Yeah. And I generally get it underneath, and that's working. Obviously, you can, if they've got a magnet flower, it can compete a bit with that, so you just kind of have to figure it out. But generally, that's been working for us. Sometimes I've had I did an Indian wedding where the groom was in like Indian attire that I couldn't hide it anywhere, so he just had to sit like loud and proud,
just chilling.
It's just hanging out there. But generally the audio quality is pretty sound. You can monitor them remotely as well. So like I'm recording this on the instant right now and I've got my phone in front of me. I can see the levels and stuff. Not that it hugely matters now with it being float. And it was the float thing that really appealed to us, because obviously when it gets a bit, you know, the PA system's really loud or you get a very excited person speaking, the Sony's, you know, obviously if you've set it to the sensitivity you've got, but you're kind of locked into that.
Yeah.
This does give you a ton of latitude to just recover, which is why I like the float stuff.
Yeah. Is it obvious that they're recording because they don't have a screen, do they?
No, they have 3 lights on them that you can illuminate so they can see the recording. Obviously, you don't want them on your groom because you've got like 3 bright green lights on. So they are, when you go into the app, it's pretty easy to see that it's recording on the app. But that's the extra step you see that most people go, oh, I can't be arsed with that. I just press the button. So yeah, I get that they're a bit fiddly, and I can see why some people would stick with the Sonys. And there's weddings that I've done where I've just thought, you know, I'm just going to use the Sonys today because it's all a bit rushed and it's just easier. Or, you know, I'm clipping the 6 speakers and it's just like, oh, I'm just going to bob one on everybody. So it's just like, I've got them both in the kit bag. But if I can use an Instamic, I will use one.
Because that sound quality and that 32-bit float can be really worth it, can't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's one thing I wanted to ask you about your ceremony, because there's one film in particular, again, that I've watched. I think it might be the same one I was talking about before, but so the ceremony's about to happen and you're actually following the bride with a gimbal in front of her, and you're kind of tracking as she's coming down, and then she kind of then comes past you, and you kind of follow her down. I think you go down. Don't you go down the side of the around the outside? Yeah. Can you talk me through that? Because were you a solo shooter at this wedding for a start? I've
never shot with a second shooter, so every wedding of mine has been solo.
Okay, wow. Okay, please talk me through that. Okay, so did I explain it well?
Yeah.
Basically, you're following a bride with a gimbal all the way from start to finish, right till she's at the end, but you don't follow her down the aisle. You kind of go around the outside and track her, don't you? Yeah. Please talk me through that, James.
Generally, it was an outdoor wedding. That was at Iscoy Park in Shropshire, I think it is. And if it's an outdoor wedding, this comes back to when we're saying like pushing yourself to, if it's hard, and do something different. I try and do it. And it doesn't always work. And this is a good example of when things don't quite go to plan as well. So if I can film her leaving the ceremony room and walk all the way down, I want that because I like that transition from when we've seen all the getting ready. It gives us a nice transition. Often you can get some nice moments with Dad as well. Yeah. And it does rely on putting a couple of static cameras up and setting them off and just hoping nobody stands in front of them. As we all know, you can tell 10 people not to stand in front of the camera, and as soon as the ceremony starts, everyone just forgets and does their own thing, and that's fine, you know, that's cool. But if it's outdoors, I like to get more of a sweeping shot because obviously you can show, you know, the outdoor sort of ceremony setup and stuff like that, and it can be a bit more dynamic to get her moving. So that one, I followed her from the house all the way out. There was quite a lot of stop-start because the bridesmaids all were going up as well. So you get a bit of a practice run as well with the bridesmaids going up. And then I just followed her. So you could basically see the ceremony was all the other side. So you could see all the guests as she's coming. And when she gets to the bottom of the aisle, I then try and go up at the side of where the guests are. Because obviously I'm not following up the aisle because I don't want to kill the photographer. And I don't like... We've all seen those videos on social media of like really intrusive videographers and photographers. I don't want to be doing that. And it's shot on like a 20mm, so it's nice and wide. And you leg it round to the front, and often I've got a cutaway that's on the groom for his reaction, and usually a safety down, straight down at like F8, just to make sure I've got her coming up with Dad. And then if I can get to the top, whatever I get there is what I get. That wedding that I did, the bridesmaids all stood in front of the camera on the groom, so I lost that. And the photographer stood in front of the camera blocking coming up the aisle.
Oh, okay.
So I lost both of my backup cameras, but I realised as I was walking up that they were both blocked. I sort of obviously looked and I probably swore in my head, and I just legged it round to get to the front. And obviously they don't rush up the aisle often, do they? They tend to take the time. And as I got to the front, I got like 2/3 of the bride coming up. I just basically dangled the gimbal over the bridesmaids' heads, just to make sure I could get her coming up to get them to come together. So I got away with it, but it was the closest call I've had to not getting away with it. Every other one's been much safer.
So that's funny that you say that, because from watching your film, you'd never know, because the way you piece it together, like I was like, that's brilliant. Like, how has he pulled that off? But he didn't.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, you did in the edit. So
horribly stressful. Horribly stressful.
Did the couple mention anything about not having the groom's reaction or anything like that at all?
No. There were some before the bridesmaids had stood there. Obviously, there were moments with the groom, and when we're talking about TV and film as your influence, well, TV and film will often cheat and take something from somewhere else and pop it in. So there was a little bit of that going on.
Oh, there we go.
The magic of telly kicked in, and I shifted some of the groom's nice reactions where he'd sort of looked over his shoulders like, that'll do for when he's turning around coming up the aisle. And I got away with it. But it got a bit rushed in that, and I didn't. That was my fault. I'd not double checked where because it was a celebrant where she was going to get the bridesmaids to stand. And if I'd done that, I would have just positioned the camera differently. It is what it is. I got away with it.
You did, absolutely, mate. You fooled me. You absolutely fooled me. So I'd want to... Gimbal is something I think I'm going to start bringing that into my work, because so often I've been doing these weddings recently where the venue and the setting and the setup really lends itself to a much better, more dynamic shot. And whenever I've had second shooters this year as well, I've been trying to get people that I know are quite decent with using the gimbal so I can bring it in, and it really adds some dynamic flair. But I have not got set the kind of workflow with it. So what's your workflow with the gimbal? Do you have a camera that's always set up on the gimbal ready to go? How does it work?
Yeah, I've one dedicated to the I have one dedicated to the gimbal camera. So yeah, that one's set up. It's slightly different because obviously that is autofocus. Because the Sony, the A7 IVs, I've not used an A7 III. I'm assuming it's probably going to be similar autofocus. You can tap the screen and it kind of locks on. It's pretty solid. So from that perspective, I just having it on autofocus makes that work. I can just, whoever's the most contrasty, the bride or the groom in the scene, I'll just tend to tap on them and then let it sort of take its lead. Occasionally it jumps off. But I'm generally shooting that at f4, f5, 6. So it's just one of them to try and keep an eye on. I have that set up in the morning. I'll probably have it locked all in its like static setup for most of the day. I will use it specifically for if there's a bride or groom moving from one location to another pre-ceremony when I've got time. If the bride's leaving, say, the house and going to the ceremony room somewhere else, or if it's an outdoor ceremony, I will use it for that. When they're entering the room for the before the meal, so there's that like quite energetic moment, that I think it works really well for that, to do a follow. So just go in and just follow them all the way to the table. Yeah. You can get quite a lot of good stuff there. Same sort of thing if they're entering the room for the first dance. If they're doing a big entrance, I'll follow that. And that then gives you like match cut options later in, so when you're editing your creative edit, I've then got lots of movement in different sequences. And I think one of the films you've seen was a Thicket Priory one that had some like parallel action that was 3 separate she was walking at the aisle, then it cuts to her walking down some stairs, which is when they were going to the thing, cuts to them getting confetti, back to the aisle walk. And it was just when you can interchange all these movement sequences and you sort of cut it at the same point, so they're both in the same position in the frame and it seamlessly cuts, it can just make like a really interesting like build. Because they had an amazing like confetti shot of this wedding where he lifts her up and the confetti cannons go off, and I kind of wanted to build something to that so it had like more impact, and having like 3 different shots that had all been done with the gimbal meant that could work a lot more dynamically than if I just shot sort of static shots. Again, it's the wedding kind of drives it. Some weddings are quite static, so it just isn't going to work. But the bigger stuff, like you were saying, the ones that have got like perhaps prettier venues, or you're outdoors, or you've got like a big entrance, it can really add something. Yeah,
absolutely. And are you shooting that in 25p even on your gimbal? Yeah,
even on the gimbal, 25p, because generally that movement stuff I want to be like quite energetic.
Yes.
Another bit I'll use, if we have singing waiters, which if you remember after COVID, everyone seemed to have singing waiters.
Didn't they?
Like,
yeah.
Oh, they found some extra budget.
I think we're over it now, aren't they? Because they're one of those things. They were only good when they were a surprise, but everyone's seen them now.
I've not had any. I don't think I've had any this year, but God, 21 and 22, it just seemed like I felt like I was getting like 3 a wedding. It just seemed there were that many of them. And
I've made my peace with them now, though. I don't
I
know
have
you.
totally, yeah. No, totally.
At first, they used to annoy me to death, and I don't really know why. I think it's because it's when you're trying to sit down and have a rest is when it happens, mainly. But then I started thinking, this is brilliant. I'm guaranteeing some great party footage, no matter what. Like, that's going to be in the bag. So even if the dance floor doesn't kick off, I've got it. And just as I made my peace with them, they vanished.
They've gone, exactly. I've gone through the exact same cycle. They were a pain in the backside because I wanted my full fat Coke whilst I was sat eating my homemade sandwich. And then you're being irritated now to go up and go and... But then I realised 9 times out of 10, the dancing's never quite what you want it to be later on. Yeah. You have it in your head, it's going to really go off, and then, like, there's a mum and a kid. And at least with the like the singing waiters, 9 times out of 10, you get some decent stuff. So I tend to do a mix. I'll do a lot of handheld, sort of 50mm. And then do a lot of wide stuff with a lot of movement, because obviously that's, when it ramps up and they're like love training around or whatever it is. And I generally love training around. I'm like, well, I can walk towards them with a gimbal and it looks really good. And it gives me something like, like some quite good stuff on there. So it does have its moments like that. But yeah, I haven't seen I haven't seen any this year, so they'll come back round. Everything's cyclical, isn't it? They'll come back round.
Absolutely in this industry. And that's when we know we've been in here that long, man, when it all starts coming back. If you are still delivering your wedding films on a USB or struggling to find a sleek professional way to showcase your work, it's time to upgrade your delivery experience with VidFlow, the ultimate online gallery for wedding filmmakers. With VidFlow, your couples can watch their wedding films in stunning quality on any device, including their TV, making it easier than ever for them to relive their best day with family and friends. Plus, with custom branding, easy downloads and cloud backup, you get a premium, hassle-free delivery solution that makes you look as professional as your films deserve. I've been using VidFlow for the last year, and my couples have been amazed by its slick interface, especially on their TV. It's like having their very own Netflix of their wedding films. You only pay for what you need, and each of my 4K galleries only cost me about £15, and they stay online for 10 years, so it's a complete no-brainer. Join thousands of filmmakers who have already made the switch. Try VidFlow today at vidflow.co and take your film delivery to the next level. So the last of our quickfire questions, which aren't very quickfire, who is your favourite wedding filmmaker or makers?
Yeah, I have a couple. So one, it will come as no surprise to anybody that knows me, is Jeff Wood, who is the guy that I entered the wedding industry was back in 2013 as a photographer, and I was just nosing through the judges, came across the video judges. I thought, I wonder what wedding videos look like, because I'd just come into the industry in like 2012, 2013, and I saw this film and I couldn't, it blew my mind. I just thought it must have been a team of like 15 people, and it turned out it was him on his own in Portland in Oregon, and it's just still to this day probably one of the best wedding films I've ever seen. And that was it. I was like a little bit obsessed with him. And then it turns out he lives not a million miles away. He's based up in Cheshire, and he was the guy that I ended up then getting mentoring from and learning pretty much everything I knew from. But his films have always, he was kind of like I think he was one of the early adopters of the 5D Mark II when it was still a bit tricky to film, and he sort of became like, inverted commas, you're probably like cringe if I said this, but like wedding famous from like the 5D Mark II on Vimeo back in the day, and then that just kind of like catapulted him into doing all the the super high end stuff, and he was like an inspiration for a lot of like the guys who ended up becoming the top guys of like our era. So I kind of always loved him. So he was like, he's still probably one of my biggest influences. And then Alejandro Calore, the Argentine Italian genius, I think is probably all you can put him down as. He's the one that Jeff would put up when we were doing the mentor, and just go like, you need to watch this. And he was like, this guy is just the best. And he was I think he was a proper filmmaker. Like, he went to film school and everything. And then like, how he does, can you film our wedding? And he just makes these incredible films that are like, they're like 8 minutes of a part of the wedding day. You don't get prep, you don't get the set, you don't get all of it like what we're doing. It's just, he'll pick a little bit and then he'll make something out of it. It's just like, I think I've cried at least 2 of his films. So, and it's just, there's one where I think you've seen this one, it's just one camera on a tripod left filming a room in a corridor, and that's it.
Yeah, work of art. It's an absolute work of art, isn't it? Like I can't even do his work justice by explaining it, right? No, it's absolute madness, but it's like it's almost creating like kind of Oscar-worthy films from weddings, like you say, from focusing on one section and that kind of. Yeah, can you explain that film? That the one? So it's basically in bridal prep, isn't it? And he's got a locked-off camera in a room, and it's kind of towards a kind of doorway, and people are coming and going, aren't they?
The bride's sort of getting ready to sort of. I think she's right of frame. And people are coming and going, and it's kind of the energy of what's going on. And again, everyone's speaking. I think it's I think it's in Spanish because I think it's Argentina, so I think it's in Spanish. So we have no idea what the conversations are, but it's interesting just to watch people come in. And then her dad comes, and obviously, I think her dad's possibly got dementia or something like that. And there's this incredibly tender moment. This is one of the films that just kills you when you're watching it. There's an incredibly tender moment between dad and daughter that. It's almost like he knew this was going to happen. And he was like, we're going to build... And all this energy builds to this quiet moment. Where it's not been set up like, like, we're going to go and get dad and bring him in corridor and wait here whilst we hide. It's not that it's just he's sort of come in, sat down, and they just have this minute... Oh, it's not even a minute, a few seconds together. And it's like, it's just incredible, isn't it? It's just...
Yeah.
And you go, I don't know, how do you be so brave to just...
Yeah.
I'm just going to trust that these things are going to happen. So his work is... I don't know how much he even shoots anymore. I think Jeff said he's running for be a politician now or something in Argentina.
Really? That is so on brand for how the kind of guy I imagine him to be. Like just anything and everything. Because that one film as well, honestly, like an absolute masterpiece. Because the feelings you get from it, it's the absolute chaos of bridal prep, because that bride is in and out of the room I think she's looking for a pair of scissors or something.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff that always happens on a wedding day. She's doing that. But at the same time, her dad stood in that room and he's kind of clearly a little bit disorientated and not really 100% sure what's going on. So she's also trying to kind of look after him and kind of explain to him what's going on as well. And so it's kind of this tender moment between the two of them, then the chaos of the wedding day. And it is... Honestly, it's almost like some kind of French art house film, isn't it? It's just wonderful in it, and it's so. I'm going to put a link to him in the show notes, because I really encourage anyone listening to this podcast, please check him out, because it will blow your mind. Like it's like nothing you've ever seen or will see again, right?
No, I think he's. I'm going to use the Jose Mourinho quote. He's not one of the bottle. He's the special one, isn't he? He is like, there is nobody that is like him. And some people will hate his grade and some people will hate his style or whatever. I think these are like mainly 10, 12-year-old films now, but they stand the test of time because if it had like if it had like a Cannes award winner on the cover, I'd go that's that. It's just there's 6 or 7 that I think we studied as part of the mentor, and we saw one called Cinnamon, which is like a pre-wedding shoot. It's just this couple that go to a lake to swim. They basically wake up, go to a shop, buy some sweets, and go and have a little swim in the lake. And he tells this story, and I did win a ton of awards and it's just like 5 minutes, and it's incredible. And you just think, there's no wedding. There's just 2 people, all shot handheld. He is a bit of a master. So I think I said this the other day, if I made a film that had 5% of something he'd done it, that'd be my absolute peak, and I would probably retire, because he is next level. So
it really is
very good. Real and short. I think is, if you try and search him, it's quite hard to find on the internet. It's quite elusive, but I think his business was real and short with a N. Yeah.
I'll do the groundwork for everyone. I'll get it in those show notes, because my God, he is hard to find, but it's worth it. So if
he ever comes over to speak at the UK, because he did do a few years ago. I think there was Rise. I don't know if anybody had been on that. Leanne's thing in Cornwall. He did come and speak at that, and I think that's the last time he's been to the UK. He'd be the one that I like. If you can get him at Coda, just put a whole thing on for him. Just have a sideshow for him and charge extra, because I'm there.
We'll see what we can do, right?
It might be a bit tricky if he's running for president in Argentina.
Exactly. But, he's got other things on his plate at the minute. But come to Coda Youth, come to Birmingham, mate. Right then. So Let's go into your journey, because I do want to dive into the the transition that you've made, because I know there are, especially when talking to people at Coda that had come, there were a few photographers that are looking to make the transition, and it'd be kind of, I think between the two of us, we've got a lot of knowledge on this, that exact journey to share, haven't we? So what was your journey from photo into video, and, well, I guess into photo originally, really, and to get yourself to where you are now as well?
Yeah, I mean, very briefly, it's a long, boring story, but obviously I was a police officer before I did this. 10 years in Greater Manchester Police. Believe it or not, being the guy that turned up if you dialed 999. And I'd come to the end of the line after 10 years of doing that. I decided I wanted to do something else, and just got married myself. And I'd always been like the Uncle Bob at the wedding, so I never slagged Uncle Bob off, because I was Uncle Bob. Just a
I
bit
think we've
younger.
all got a little bit of that in our past, let's be honest, especially when we start off.
Yeah, no, I was that guy, and I'd always thought when I retired from the cops at 55, like, I'd do something. All that changed, the retirement all got pushed back and everything. So my wife, after getting married, said, just buy I had a D500. No, it wasn't a D500. That was a better camera. It was a little crop sensor thing anyway. And she was like, just go and buy a D700, which is the full frame, like, good camera back in 2012. Couple of zoom lenses and a 50. Shoot a couple of weddings. She managed to send an email around her firm, and there was a girl in the Leeds office on Don't Tell the Bride at the time. So she rings me up. She's like, I've got your wedding, Don't Tell the Bride. I've never shot a wedding. I've just, like, shot a few.
Your first wedding was going to be on Don't Tell the Bride?
Telly wedding. So I'd shot, like, my mate's, like, a couple of shots from the aisle at my mate's wedding, never done anything proper. So, like, anyway, 10 days later, I'm there there's the film crew and everything. I'm, like, trying to make out like I know what I'm doing. I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. And somehow managed to put together a half cobbled set that wasn't terrible. I think the fact the bride and groom were, like, quite good looking, and it was quite a nice venue, and it was quite an interesting wedding, probably helped. And of course, you've been on TV, so therefore you're good, because that's how life works. If you've been on the telly, you're good. And I managed to sort of blag an album with the BBC. I stuck the BBC Three logo on the first page of it, and so when anybody opened the sample album, I was like, "Oh, is this on the telly? Yeah, this is on the telly. I've been on the telly." And I managed to book like 20 or 30 jobs, just leveraging friends and family on Facebook, as it was then. Anywhere to do it. And I basically had too much work. I didn't have enough leave, so I had to quit the cops. So I quit that. And once you're in, you've got the fear then, haven't you? You've got, like, you just quit your job. You've got to make it work. Yeah. And I sort of ended up doing like 40 weddings in my first year full time. It was like
really?
45 weddings. The wedding, I was for next to nothing. Yeah. I was charging like between £300 and £800. Which I was like,
when you first started those first weddings, were you still in, did you quit the police before you started doing the weddings, or were you still working doing the police as well?
I was still full-time in the cops in 2013. So I left the cops just before Christmas in 2013 because I'd worked enough Christmases, so I'm off. That year I shot 17 weddings, so I just fit it in on like rest days and stuff like that where I could squeeze it in. And I realised that I'd already booked like 20 odd weddings for the year after. It was like, I haven't got enough leave, so I'm going to have to bail. So I then ended up with like 46 weddings the year after. Again, I wasn't making huge amounts of money. I sort of matched my police salary in my second year, so I was like buzzing because I was amazing. If I could have made 20 grand, I was like, I thought that just seemed nuts. And then I sort of matched my sergeant's salary, so I was like, oh, this is all right, this. And then I was pretty cheap. I was under £1,000, and there's a guy in Manchester called David Stubbs, photographer, was always like ranking number one on Google, so everyone knew who he was around us. But he was pretty solid on the business side, and I got introduced to him around the same time that I met Jeff, ironically. And Dave was just the first to say, like, you should be charging £1,500, put your prices up, like, now. And I put my price up to that, and I booked a job the day after, and that was it then. That's solidified me at £1,500. So I generally shot for about 4 or 5 years, like 45 to 50 weddings at £1,500, and I frankly thought I was stealing a living. Somebody was going to come along and say, this isn't real. You can't be making this amount of money because you are just blagging it. Which is probably how most of us are. We're all just making it up as we go along.
Absolutely.
So I was doing that, and I think I mentioned earlier then I was starting to, once I got into the 1,500 market, I was starting to work with more and more videographers, and starting to establish that they were charging £2,000 or maybe £2,500. And I'd always had a bit of an interest in video, going right back to when I was at college. And I went on a design course, and the course next to us was like a new media course, and I should have done that, but it is what it is. So I kind of always had this interest in video, and then I'd moved to Sony in 2017 when the A9 came out, and I realised like I've got a very capable video camera, and so I just started to do sort of dabble with it, did a couple of courses, learnt off a couple of people. Didn't really fancy doing it. It just didn't appeal to me. The editing looked like a bit of a ball ache, and I just thought it's pretty easy doing photos. But this was 2017, midway through 2017, I had a really, really long wedding, like 12 o'clock ceremony, 4:30 food, all in one place. I was like, do you know what? I've got a spare camera. Let's just film and see if we can make a highlights film alongside the stills. And it was absolutely terrible. Really, really rubbish. It was on a Nikon with no stabilization on an 85mm hand. Oh, it was awful.
Usha.
Yeah, it's just a real piece of crap. But I enjoyed making it, and that made me then think, right. And I did a wedding then with John Boy Wilson, the king of UK wedding videographers, the main admin dude. He got me a freebie wedding with him at a pretty decent wedding. And he sort of gave me some feedback and tips and critiques and stuff like that, because obviously he knows what he's talking about. And then I decided, actually, I'm going to do a 50-50 split. And that's when Andy Griffiths helped me out, who is, from...
Yeah, top lad, Andy.
He's the crazy Welsh guy in the Northwest. But he was fantastic, because he went round all his couples, said, do you want a free wedding film? This guy will come along, he'll film it, no pressure. And he had like 5 couples come back saying, yeah, can we have it? All decent venues. Because if I'm going to introduce, because this is a big one, if anybody is a photographer, if you're going to introduce video, you've got to be roughly charging the same, don't you? You can't.
Oh, yeah. Well,
you can't
ideally more, because the edit's so much longer.
The edit's more. You can't be doing your own legs by charging like 800 quid for a video, and you could be charging £2,000 for photos. You've got to learn and get there pretty quick. And I went with Andy, and the reason I went with Andy, and again, top tip to anybody thinking of doing it, you're gonna make a ton of mistakes. I don't think I've done a wedding yet where I still haven't made a mistake, but you're gonna make some pretty horrible mistakes early doors. And do them for free. Make sure the couple know that you're gonna make mistakes, and get that in there, and get them out your system, and learn from them super quick. Because I made tons in the first 4. And my 4th or 5th wedding, I lost a ton of footage. I didn't back it up properly.
Really?
And that'd have probably been the end of me if that was a paid gig. I had enough to cobble a bit together, but not like what it should have been. I lost quite a lot of the drink reception, quite a lot of prep, and some of the dancing. I don't know how. I must have just...
Really? On your main from your main camera as well? Like your B-roll camera?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I had...
Do you have any idea what happened at all?
No, I probably hadn't copied it over properly, and then I formatted the card, so I probably copied some bits and forwarded it, but like it still makes me sick thinking about it, that day. And it was a free wedding, they knew they might not get anything, it was all... But that doesn't make you feel any better, No. Like I said, I managed to cobble something together that was okay and passable. I had speeches, I had ceremony, so I had enough to sort of muddle through, but it made me realize I need to go away and do another 4. And again, I went to do another 4 with Andy, and by the end of sort of, I think it was 9 free weddings, which was a lot because I shot like 45, 46 stills that year, so I added a lot to my workflow, but I felt like I'd sort of learned enough about how not to mess stuff up and put a proper backup policy in place. I'm proper anal. I'll have like 2 cards off site. I even keep one of the cards I've shot on, and I know people think that's mental, and I've got millions of cards, but I can't lose it if I've never deleted it. So when you get back from a wedding, I'm anal about, like, during the wedding day, I will be backing it up during the meal. And when I get home, I want to make sure I've seen everything's on the computer, and I've got it all into I edit on Premiere. Everything's in Premiere, and I've skimmed through it, and I've seen everything I've shot. I have expected to see is there. Once I've got that, I can go to bed. I need to make sure it's all there. So it's little things like that I'm sure photographers do, because you want to make sure you've. It's a similar thing with offloading, but it's just easier when you're coming off 3, 4 cameras to make silly mistakes where you just don't copy one across.
Yeah, I'm the exact same as you, and it's from my photo days. I would always keep one SD card from each camera, and I still do that now with video, even though it's costing me a fortune.
Yeah.
With the thing is with SD cards, if you spend 200 quid here and there, you don't realize how much it's added up to over time. But I think I've got enough now for 10 weddings before I need to start formatting cards, and usually by that point I've started working on the edit, so it's fine, I can get through it. But one recommendation I'll make for people is an app called Offshoot. It used to be called Hedge, and with that you can make multiple backups, like ingest from multiple sources. So you can put all your memory cards in one go if you wanted, and you can send it to multiple backups as well. So you can have it to your hard drive, you can have it to other backups. But what it does, it's checking every single file as it copies it. So it's making sure that they're the exact same on the other. It's making sure it's taking everything off your SD card, but it's making sure all the files are copied perfectly. It's like checking them as it goes. So it's almost like foolproof. Yeah. And I use it as well for when I'm taking it off my hard drive onto my 2 external drives as well, because it's checking that they're both the same, and then that both drives are the exact same. So you can't go wrong with it. And I think it's something like, it's one of those ones where you pay to own it, but then you have free updates for a year, and then after that you have to pay extra. So, but I think it's like 100 quid or something, and I reckon it's worth it for the peace of mind, isn't it? Something like that.
I'll be downloading that tomorrow and paying for it. Well, I
see if I can get an affiliate link.
Yeah, get an affiliate link. Come on. No, you stuff like this. It's your business, isn't it? And that's the difference between professionalism and not. Those things cost money, but that's really, we should be spending that money on those. I mean, I used to use Photo Mechanic when I was a photographer, and that it didn't check the files in the same way, but it could put them to a couple of different drives simultaneously. Whereas as at the moment, I'm copying them to one, and then I'm having to run a backup and run it backblaze overnight. And stuff does happen, doesn't it? Drives glitch and files glitch and stuff like that. So
absolutely, yeah.
I'll put the link in the bottom.
Yeah, in the description below. Yeah, it is, because I used to use Photo Mechanic as well, and Photo Mechanic does actually copy check the files in the same process. It's the same thing, yeah. But that same way as you can bring them in and send them off to 2 drives. Yeah, same setup, but for video, and it's it doesn't have to be video; it could be photo as well. But highly recommend that to people.
That's why I listen to Coda, you see. I always get something from every podcast, and I've even got something from the one I'm on, which is. You see what I mean?
I love it, mate.
It's just such a fantastic support. It's brilliant.
Just nicking ideas off everybody, mate, and bringing it into one area. Hey guys, just a quick break from the episode to talk to you in a bit more detail about the software we discussed called Offshoot. After this chat with James, I reached out to Offshoot, and they have kindly offered Coda listeners a 10% discount code. Offshoot is the ultimate app for backing up your wedding footage and audio. It allows you to run simultaneous, verified transfers from multiple sources to multiple destinations, ensuring your valuable files are securely backed up every time. Every file is checked and verified to ensure it is copied across properly, and the built-in duplication detection allows you to pause, resume, or top up transfers at a later date, knowing it will only copy over the files that haven't already transferred over. For peace of mind backup and ingestion, Offshoot truly is the perfect solution, and as a special offer for our listeners, you can get 10% off at checkout by using the code CODA10. There is a link to the software in the podcast description. Now back to the episode. This is the situation I found myself in, where I knew my head had been turned for video, and I knew that was the direction I wanted to go.
Yeah.
But then my wife was saying to me, she was like, so I had quite a successful business. I was turning over good money each year. And then it was a case of saying, right, I want to move now. I want to change completely and do video. And she was like, oh, okay. So basically, you're gonna have to charge less, and it's gonna take you a lot longer, right? And I was like, yep. That's exactly what I'm gonna do. But so the problem is, you find yourself you have to charge more quickly, don't you, to be able to make that business sustainable. So how did you go about that?
Yeah, I mean. I was in the exact same position. I was just under the VAT threshold every year, like really solid business, and you suddenly go, I'm going to rip it all up and start again, which to then take 5 times as long to edit and have to buy twice as much kit, it just, it's a bit mad. But I realised, just like you said, I've got to do it super quick. You know, there's no So the simplest thing to do is you buy it, just go and buy knowledge. And in my case, I went and contacted Jeff because we'd had this conversation probably at the end of 2017. We'd gone to a gig and my head was thinking about it. And I just said, like, would you ever mentor somebody? And he was like, yeah, give us a shout whenever. And like early 2019, then I'd sort of made my year of getting my mistakes out of the way. I'd picked up a paid wedding. So Pete Lawson he'd done the same thing. The Lawsons had done a few for free. And what had happened is one of their friends of their freebie clients had come back and said, hey, are you still doing free weddings like 3 years later?
Yeah, that is the one problem with free weddings.
Yeah, he was like, no, we're like really good now. So no, we don't do them for free. So they said, do you know anybody that's like kind of new? And Pete very kindly recommended myself as somebody new at the time. And I charged £1,000 because I was like, well, it's less than photos and I'm still new, but it was Walcott Hall, which is a really cool London couple, like great Matt Parry was the photographer, really great photographer. So I was like, oh, this might be a decent wedding. And it was, you know, like really lucky really to get sort of my first gig. Was like a lot of things fell into place. And it was a good film that came off the back of that. And I was like, right, I need to know everything very quick. So I went to Jeff. I was like, right, I need to just download your brain, basically. So, you know,
yeah.
What's that going to cost? And back then, obviously Jeff's still doing it. He will be charging a different amount now, but it was over 3,000, which is still a significant investment, like back in 2019. But I just figured it's like £300 a month. I went and sat down, and within 10 minutes of sitting down, he'd like blown my mind with what the possibilities were. And then basically we spent a year then where I'd shoot a couple of weddings, come back and see him. He totally, I wanted to keep this dead clean so you didn't have to put that little E on the thing, but he'd shit sandwich me. And it would be like, I like this is all terrible, and I like that. And you go in, as each month progressed, the rubbish bit in the middle just got less and less. And it was just to be able to go to somebody that has pretty much had your journey. They've come from nowhere. You know, he basically picked a camera up. He used to deliver. He used to go and fetch and carry boats from around the world for rich people, and it was his dad's business. And he got a video camera, and they just said, "Can you make a promo video?" And that then lent to, "Can you make a wedding film?" And so it was all kind of the same thing. So he's been there. He's done all the same sort of weddings that we've all done, starting out very small, ending up going to these huge, you know, giant $100 million budget weddings in India. Like, he's been there and done it with all of them. And to be able to have that wealth of expertise of somebody saying, do you know what, when this happens, this is what you should be thinking about doing. And when you're editing this is what you could have shot because it would have given you these options. So to be able to just have somebody who could, and even sometimes you sit you down with an edit and you just tweak a few things, you go, oh my God, it's like a million times better. And over the course of a year, that all sort of eventually sinks in. And the material difference was I charged £1,000 at the beginning of 2019. By the end of 2019, before I'd even finished the mentoring, I was at 2,000. So I've doubled that, and I was charging, I think it was at 1,800 for photos. So I very quickly started charging more than what I was charging for photos. So it started to become, well, I want to book more film jobs because I'm getting better money for that. And of course, we all know what happened in 2020. Just when I was about to be unleashed on the world decided we're not going to do that this year. But then when it came to like, we restarted in 2021, because we had so many weddings, it was pretty easy to apply it because it was just consistent work all the time, you know. So all the learning, I got to sort of reinforce it really quickly. But the best tip I'd say for anybody doing it is go and find somebody whose work you like and see if they do mentoring and see if they will offer what they know to you, because it'll just plug in those gaps really quick. And it's kind of the same the other way. There's a lot of videographers that are moving to photo as well now, because obviously the lines are blurring a lot, aren't they? And in business sense, it makes a lot of sense to offer more than one thing. And in the same way for photographers, the videographers that are thinking of going photographer, go and find your favorite photographer and go and pick their brains and see if they'll mentor you, because the amount you learn, and there's a lot that is transferable between the two. You know, a lot of the skills will help you be better at the thing you originally did. If I shot photos, I'd like to think I was a better photographer now for having done some of the videography stuff.
Yeah, that's for me. That is 100% what's happened, because like I do the odd photo one now. It's usually kind of family member of a wedding that I've shot before, and I kind of, for some reason, I just don't. I find it hard to say no to people. So I end up doing them. But when I have, I'm like thinking, I'm so much better at photos now, because in camera, my editing process is so much less now because I'm nailing exposure for one, which I was wild with that before my video days. I tell you, I just get it in the ballpark and I'll fix it in post. But yeah, there's so much to be learned, and like you say, mentorship is incredible, like absolutely incredible. I've seen it firsthand with my friend Ali Kings. He got mentored by Dan Yates, and he basically, it's a free pass to skip the shit years. Yeah. It's literally what it is. There's that first 3 years where we're struggling and we're finding our feet. You get to skip that with mentorship because you get given the cheat codes effectively. Yeah. All that stuff that you have to learn through trial and error, you get told that and you get to implement it. And if it's like an ongoing mentorship as well, that's even better because you can they can help as you're developing, as your work is developing, they can kind of increase the kind of content they can, because it's a lot to take in initially, isn't there? Yeah. Like when you first move over. But if it's a long-term thing, gradually as you're improving and your knowledge is improving, then they can kind of increase the kind of expertise they can pass upon you. And it's, that's such a good shout. Find someone whose work you admire and then hit them up and see if they'll do mentorship. Because if they're not offering it if publicly, they absolutely will if you contact them. Like, who wouldn't, right? Who wouldn't want that kind of money?
Yeah, it's just a really good second sort of, not passive income, because obviously you've got to do a bit, but you're not having to edit it, are you? You know, you're just you're sharing your experience, you're sharing your what you've learned over years of making mistakes, basically. Because that, for me, it was, how do I not? It's the same thing. I had 2-3 years where I grew the business as a photographer, and you make mistakes, and you make sort of simple business mistakes. Yeah. You're just bypassing all that. Yeah, you're paying for it, but I mean, it's just the simplest thing. I went from £1,000 to £2,000 in 9 months. Yeah, you know, that paid for itself in that 6-month period. So it was a complete no-brainer. And there's, like you said, most people will do it. Some people might not, because it's just not for them. But most would do it because it's quite flat. It's flattering. Somebody comes and says, "Will you teach me what you know?" It's dead flattering. Yeah. And like I say, it works both ways. You know, the people that are looking to add photos in now, especially I did a workshop for people shifting from photo to film, and I was saying any couples now, whether you're friends or it's a husband and wife, or any couple shooting together, just offer both. You've got such an advantage. Yeah. Couples now, aside from the content creator thing, which is obviously a new sort of variable that's been chucked into the mix, but the most will want to buy everything from one person. So if you can offer both, that is such, you basically, you can charge double, make twice the income from one gig, which is harder to get than probably it has been for a while at the moment. Yeah. And yeah, you can you're in pole position to sort of really do well at the moment.
Absolutely. And that's the conversation I always have whenever I'm shooting with a photography duo. I'm always saying to them, why are you letting your couples get a videographer in? Why are you letting them get me in? You guys should be handling this. They're there for the taking, because they'll more often than not, I know it's changing now, but quite often still the photographer gets booked first. Yeah, they've got first dibs to take them on board. So if you're shooting in a duo, one of you needs to be learning video, man, 100%. That you will just, because like you say, people would prefer to buy from one supplier. It's one questionnaire they have to get, one invoice they have to pay. Yeah. It just makes life easier. They know there's going to be no clash on the day. So yeah, definitely.
And it's trust as well. If they've trusted you to do one product, then you've automatically got their trust for the second one.
Yes.
And that seems to be the biggest selling point to couples. The amount of people that have come to me and asked, "Do I still do photos when with video?" Because we just want to get it all from you. And I'm like, sorry, no, I don't do it anymore. And I'm like, these are things I'm teaching in my course, and I am a bad business person, because I am like, no, I don't do that. Go and take your money to somebody else, spend it with them. But I'd like to justify that by, I usually give it to the photographers who recommend me, so it's a nice way of saying thank you. But
I'm the same. That's why I prefer to hand it off to other people rather than take it on myself. Occasionally I do a combo, but I don't know. It's a different mindset, isn't it? Bouncing between the two, getting an associate shooter in, it's just complicated. But if you're a company with two of you, where there's always another person there, it's an absolute no-brainer.
It's a winner, isn't it? Because I think that's a good thing to touch on, is trying to do both as well, because that's something that I tried when I first started.
What, hybrid? Shoot hybrid?
Yeah. And I tell you what, if you can do that, you're probably one of the top 1% or something, because that was one of the hardest things. My brain can't go from, because there is a difference. This is one of the key things I think for photographers coming to video. Whilst you understand aperture, you understand light, ISO, composition, you understand all the fundamentals. Shooting film is different. There's a different way of doing it. You're going to find that focal lengths, I shot 35-85. I now rarely, if ever, go below 50mm, other than the gimbal. It looks different. It feels different. Everything you've learned needs to be sort of readjusted. And I used to struggle. I couldn't shoot stills on a Saturday and then go and do film on a Sunday without my brain just sort of wobbling as to like, whoa, I can't get my head around it. And I know, there are some people who can easily do that. That I think I listened to one of Pete's podcasts, Pete Lawson's podcast, where he finds that no problem to switch between two. I can't do that. So I think you've got to go and figure that out for yourself as well, because hybrid, that's tough.
I think the most important thing with hybrid is setting expectations for your couples and what you actually can and can't deliver. And I had a chat with Hannah McGregor, and she's an awesome hybrid shooter. But I think a lot of her heavy lifting is literally the conversations with the couples beforehand, saying you'll get this and you'll get this, but you probably won't get this and this. You know what I mean? It's kind of like laying out those expectations. And because originally I was going to try and do hybrid. What I soon realized for me personally, I was doing a bang average job of both. And I was just not happy with what I was putting out there. It was kind of like they were getting average photos and an average video, and it was just. I feel like we get into this job. I think most people that are in the wedding industry, they're not really in it for the money. That's just a little Brucey bonus to us, this creative endeavor, isn't it? So like when I was doing, I think, I could earn great money doing this hybrid, but then at the same time, I'm not happy with the product I'm putting out there, because with video especially, there is so many elements that you have to take into consideration when it comes to the audio and multi-camera setups. It's impossible to be doing, like, we couldn't create the films we're creating and do the photos we used to be creating. It's going to be two different products, isn't it? Completely.
I think it's sort of the classic example of like the green-eyed monster, isn't it? Like you see, I could charge like twice as much, and I'm there for one day. I can make all this money. It's dead easy. I'll just switch the button between, and it is easy to do that. But it's the mindset. It's remembering to do it. It's the compromises for like walking down the aisle, walking up the aisle, confetti. Which is your priority? And ultimately, whichever you don't shoot it for, those are moments that the other thing's going to suffer. So if you're shooting stills and you shoot all those moments stills, your video is going to be missing those, and vice versa. And I know the A93's come out, and that can do a little bit of both. And maybe I think in the next couple of years, that will probably, the way the phones and cameras and everything's developed, it probably will start to blur a lot more. And maybe that's the direction we might have to start considering. But right now, if you were learning one, I would say stick to one or the other till you've sort of mastered it, and then figure out. Because like you said, there are some people who can do it, and fair play to them. I wasn't one of them. Like, to me, it was just, I felt like I was 5 steps behind where I should have been all day long when I was doing that.
Yeah.
And then I thought, I'm delivering a substandard product here for the money, and that's just not good business, because it'll bite me on the bum eventually when I drop a big clanger.
Yeah.
So I bailed out of that after. I think I did it once, and that was enough for me to go never again.
I do then look at how photo has moved, how photos changed, because I think we started at a similar time where it was very document. It was the height of like the kind of digital move over, and documentary was the thing, right? And it was all about capturing moments and being here, there, and everywhere. The photographers I'm working with now, the editorial style is quite dominant, and that is almost a throwback to how film photography used to be, where they're not capturing everything. They're not capturing loads of candids. They're kind of like, it's all mainly set up and post shots. And I think I could probably do that style and video much better than, but not the style I'm known for my photo. I don't think I could do that in video, but I reckon I could do editorial style possibly and video. Yeah,
because it's a lot more, probably I'm trying to find the right words so I don't offend anybody, but it's a bit more stop-start, isn't it? There's like set-up moments that occur that the photographer's controlling.
Yeah.
And that, from the video perspective can be a bit awkward because it can sort of break the day up a bit, can't it? But if you were doing both, having that ability to control I think the biggest problem is there's a lot of flash, isn't there, now in the editorial side, which obviously that's a slightly competing, we're not using flash out with video ever, so there is that element of it's another thing to contend with then is the flash, whereas back with the documentary days, aside from dance floor, I didn't ever really use flash.
It was frowned upon, wasn't it, to crack a flash out at any point? Like you almost had to act like you weren't even there as a photographer, like you were a guest.
You had to apologise to the video. Like people come up, that I'm sorry, I'm going to use flash because it's really dark. Is that all right? It's like whereas now everyone's like, yeah, I'm using flash. I mean, I don't care. It doesn't bother me at all. But I'm just like, I think it's quite hard to do both, and I think it sounds like there's an easy way to make a lot of money. It's not easy. It can work, but and then say if you go down the route of associates and stuff like that, you've got to find somebody you trust who's definitely going to turn up, and it starts to get harder to scale it. So I think you've sort of got to make a decision. Like I think what we did is we picked a lane and stuck with it. Or you do 50-50 and you just kind of like sell yourself across both. I think that's probably one of the best ways to make it work.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what was the hardest thing in terms of shooting that you found from moving from photo into video? What was the hardest thing you found to pick up?
I found focusing the trickiest. Manual focusing was hard.
Yeah.
And still to this day on some of my lenses, I'm not entirely sure which way they go. I just guess. And
as in which way you need to turn it?
Yeah, which way am I right in thinking some lenses go one way and some go the other? Because why? That's just cruel.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think they do. Yeah.
So, I think I've got a Samyang that's like opposite to my Zeiss. I'm like, what? Why is that not a standard?
Why would they do that?
Yeah, that's horrible. But I found that quite hard because obviously I was shooting on an A9 at the end, which was like missile lock. You just pick someone's eyes up, boom, everything in focus. And obviously, with video, it can be artistic to be out of focus, and sometimes it can be a choice, and there is less pressure like that. But I did find that much harder, to sort of like figure out how to sort of keep things in focus whilst sort of a bit of movement and stuff as well. So that took a lot of practice, but that's where having kids kicked in and paid off, because I just practiced on them at home. And they move a lot, don't they? So I'm like, if literally. I can follow a kid round, I can nail a wedding. And again, that's something I said on the workshop. Like that's your practice. If you've got a pet or not a cat because they're useless, but if you've got a dog or kids, practice manual focusing on a dog or kids. And if you can nail that, you'll be sorted for a wedding. You'll be able to fly through.
So are you a firm believer in manual focus all day then?
I'm a control freak, and I just still don't fully trust autofocus. Just because sometimes when I'm on the gimbal and I've locked it onto the bride, for example, and I'm following, and it just decides it loves that person in the crowd more, and it hops across, and you're just like, touch it, get back. And I just because I do use the touch for when they're walking up the aisle. So I've got the static camera at the front. I've got a 35mm autofocus that I pop on then, just because I know that I'm getting everybody coming up the aisle and I can rack focus really easily. But I'm controlling that on the touch screen, so I don't ever let that sort of do its own thing. But through the day, I just like to. I like the look of this out of focus, so we're just gonna knock it out, or something interesting happening there. I just like that control for doing it. So I don't think there's right or wrong. I think there's a lot of people that will trust autofocus and it works for them. It's just kind of how I've done it.
I mean, I'm autofocus all day. Like apart from like speech and ceremony, I'll lock it off at a certain point. But occasionally I do lose a certain shot to autofocus every now and again, especially on dancing. But I don't trust my eyes though, man. I've tried even when I'm locking a shot off for speeches, and I've got it. I've used the autofocus to lock in, and then I switch to manual so it's locked off. The amount of times I go and change it and tweak it because I'm just not trusting my eyesight for some reason. Like, I think I've got a problem.
I am the same, and you're fiddling with it all, and then you're in the edit and it's moving a little bit, and you're like, just leave it alone. It was fine the first time. What are you doing? And the other thing I think as well for like anybody coming from photo to video is it's stuff like focus peaking and zebras, stuff that you never use as a photographer, but because obviously when you're shooting in RAW and you can pretty much make it bright white and pull it back and it'd be usable. Obviously, even if you shoot log, which I don't, I shoot S-Cinetone, purely because I can't handle the ISO stuff going on in my head. Fair play again to anybody that can do that. You don't have that much light. It's like shooting JPEG. You've got a tiny amount of latitude, but you kind of got to nail it. You've got to get it right in camera. And coming across, there's a lot more discipline to that. You can't just be as fly as you are when you're shooting in RAW. So again, that was another like learning curve. If you overcook it, you overexpose or underexpose it. Yeah, you've got to practice again on that. And again, shooting at home, you can practice all these things because you can find a window and you can shoot into the light and stuff like that to sort of like start to learn how to expose things and get the look you like. But you just have to start thinking, I haven't got that leeway to stick it into post and sort it out afterwards. Because I think even with S-Log, you are limited, aren't you? It's nothing like RAW.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot better than, because I've recently converted to log and I don't think I could go back now. But yeah, there's a lot more flexibility than like the standard profiles and the other profiles, like the flatter profiles. But yeah, there's limits. There's limits to it. But S-Cinetone is interesting to me. So that is kind of out of the box. That looks quite decent, doesn't it? That's the whole. Yeah. That's the whole point of it, isn't it? You don't need to do much tweaking to it. Has it got much flexibility in dynamic range? Is it better than say just having like picture profile off? When I first started training with Jeff, we used I don't know if you remember autumn leaf setting that was a standard profile on the Sony cameras. Right. Because he was like, we'll worry about colouring last. Like, let's get all the other stuff right. So just do a standard profile and make sure it just looks quite nice on the back of the camera. And as long as once you cracked exposure, it was okay. It looked pretty good. And they've taken it away on the newer cameras. Autumn leaves isn't there. It was like quite a warm sort of standard profile. It's quite nice. So then I moved to a Cine 4, I think, which you had a little bit more latitude. And then when the S-Cinetone was announced, I think they took some of the science out of the Venice, which is Sony's cinema camera, and they allegedly applied it to the cameras we buy. I don't know how much of this is marketing bump, but they claim it's like some kind of hybrid log gamma curve, so it preserves the highlights slightly better than Cine profiles and a lot better than standard profiles. And when I've sort of trialed it, there is quite a lot more recovery that you can get. Obviously, If you shoot log next to it, there's not as much recovery as you get in log, but it's better than standard and better than Cine profiles. And it looks decent out of the box. There is no minimum ISO of like 640 or 800 or something like that, so you can pretty much shoot what you see. And that's what I like. I just, whatever I'm getting on the back of the camera is roughly what I'm going to get then when I go into post. And again, anything that just speeds up my workflow in editing as well. Because obviously when I trialed log, I didn't do it at a wedding. I just found like those extra steps. I was like, oh, unless I'm shooting into like a super bright window or something like that, I'm probably going to be all right. But it's always there going, is there a better, it's the same as the Instamic. Is there a better way of doing it? Well, yeah. Should I learn it? Well, probably, and so never say never. And if I'm shooting log on the iPhone, I'm going to start getting all that log goodness, aren't I? And starting to see all the flexibility that it's got. So I'll come back to me in 6 months and I'll be like fully S-logged up. The irony, if it's the iPhone that makes you move over to shooting log.
Just making my life harder. It's just adding more steps into the workflow.
Still talking about kind of like the transition into video. So I really think that photographers have the tool sets to be phenomenal videographers. The hard yards have already been done in terms of the learning, like the composition, light. And when you become a videographer, suddenly the spotlight isn't on you, because let's be honest, as a photographer, you're 90% wedding planner, 10% photographer, aren't you? Everyone looks to you to move the day along, or you have to subtly make the day move along without people realizing it, because everything needs to hit certain times for you to get your shots at certain times. When you become a videographer, that responsibility is 100% gone. Absolutely gone. Yeah. And yes, we have the things that we have to, like, that are our responsibility, like kind of setting up for ceremonies, getting audio, setting up for speeches, which are really, really important. the guests and the couple have no idea what you're up to.
Yeah.
And there is no kind of pressure on you to perform in front of people. You just get to go and do your own thing. And I found that weight of responsibility lifting from me. I just filled it with creativity. Like I had all this extra headspace to kind of approach a day doing my own thing, because no one cares what the videographer's doing, do they? Have you found a similar kind of experience?
Yeah, absolutely. You are, like you said, you've been sort of de facto wedding planner, aren't you, as the photographer? Because your people are looking to you. You're like kind of the voice. That to me, after 6-7 years, and I don't mind. I'm quite happy to talk, and I'm quite happy to like move stuff along and get involved. But just being able to not have that and just be, I'm doing whatever I want, that's made the day more enjoyable for me. Yes. I don't have to worry about what am I going to do with the groups if it rains. It's not my problem. What am I going to, where am I going to do the big group shot with everybody? Don't know. Don't know. I'm not worried about it. It's just nice to have that. Like you said, there's different pressures that kick in then, especially if your bridal prep's running over and that the registrars are basically saying, well, we're going to go on time because we've got another wedding, and you're suddenly thinking, right, I could really do with being over in there now, getting the audio set up, and because for whatever reason I didn't do it an hour ago because something better was happening. Those little things sometimes get a bit stressful, but in the end they're not going to start a ceremony until they're not going to start until you've sort of gone, look, I've got everything going. So you do have that element of even control there. Same for the speeches. You can always sort of like give us 2 minutes. It's just much more liberating. And once you're not having to worry about that, you've hit the nail on the head. Suddenly your brain starts to think more about what you're doing rather than what you're going to be, yes, creatively what you're doing, rather than, well, who needs to be where now and where do I need to be? And suddenly then it is more, I find it more enjoyable. I just find it more fun. And I sometimes enjoy just sitting watching. I mean, there was always a standing joke when I worked with a certain videographer that he'd turn up, do 20 minutes of the drinks reception and then bugger off. And you'd find him like eating a sandwich somewhere and he'd be like, I'm done now, I've got everything I need. Just waiting for the next bit. And you'd be like, oh, what a cushy life you've got. And then, you switch over and you go, oh, I can sort of see. Because you don't, like, as a photographer, you're always waiting for that moment, which can often happen at any point.
Yeah.
And you've got to get that exact moment. As a videographer, generally, if you've got enough to tell your story, you're going to be able to work what you want in the edit. If that great moment happens, it's not always the end of the world if you don't have that in the film, because you probably already got a good idea that you're going to create something else that's going to be really good. Yeah. So I've just found that I'm controlling what the good moments are a lot more in my films than perhaps as a photographer where the wedding controls you. Yeah. I feel like I'm always like one step ahead, whereas as a photographer, you're always trying to at least stay level. Yeah. Try not to get left behind. If that was the battle I always found.
Yeah, that's 100% how I felt it as well. I feel like, with photo, I was always worrying about what's coming next and what I need to do next. As a videographer, I am so present and I'm just absorbed in that day and in that moment and capturing what's there. The only times, like you say, at bridal prep, I'm worrying a little bit about ceremony. Yeah. And then there comes a certain point where safe speeches are going to be first. Before they go in a room, I want things to be kind of set up. But other than that, I'm like just present in the moment. And it's made me better when I have switched back to photo on those random occasions where I do it. I try and carry that mindset with me. Yeah, because I found my biggest worries with, I don't think I was ever really comfortable as a photographer, if I'm honest, like kind of from a mental aspect. I always kind of fought it a little bit. Like I kind of dreaded weddings to a certain point back then. I really did. And it wasn't until I got right into my career where I started to enjoy it. As soon as I switched over to video, I was like, I love this. I love weddings. This is where I want to spend all my time. But it's because as a photographer, I think I was spending the entire day worrying about when and where I was going to do portraits. Like, I'd be driving to a venue thinking, where the hell am I going to do the portraits? And the whole day I was just thinking about that and not being present enough to capture the day. As a videographer, I don't give a shit. Like, I don't even check the weather anymore. Honest to God, because...
Well, it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't. Because I want to capture that day. And if it's like, if the weather's kind of unusual or whatever, I'll make that part of the story. I'll bring that into the film. It's like, if there's challenging things or different things, as a videographer, I thrive on it because it's interesting, it's new, and it means there's a new way to tell a story.
Well, when we talk about... This was the big thing I went to work to go with Jeff. He said, what's the biggest thing you want to learn in the videos? Because I obviously got the basics boxed off. And I was like, it's storytelling. Your films interest me and captivate me. And it's because they're obviously well-told stories, which he was pleased about, because obviously that was his area of strength. Again, people like to be flattered, but genuinely, that's the thing I want to learn. And one of the big things we took from that is, as a photographer, bad weather is a nightmare, and it can seriously impact your end product, like hugely. If you're stuck inside, nobody will go outside, you can't go outside, there's crap light inside, all that, it can really impact. The stuff they booked you for on your website is probably not what they're going to get that day. And you're always, in my head, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to bust out some flash, and I'm going to have to make something. I'm going to have to create something that's spectacular, because otherwise they're going to complain. I always have that pressure, and where am I going to do the 10 group shots? Because I can't even line 3 people up in this corridor, never mind. So I had all that, and I think it was the same when I started. I had no fear. And then I developed all this fear. It's like I got the bigger wedding, not bigger weddings, but like bigger weddings than the 500 quid ones. And it started to become like a stress, and video is just a release. And going back to the storytelling aspect, the key part of story is having conflict. And in a wedding, generally that's quite hard. It's one of the few days in life where even if there is genuine conflict, you probably don't want to feature it. I did very, very recently have a very difficult mother of the bride who seemed hell-bent on making the bride's day a misery. And it was pretty awkward 5 or 6 times. Like, I've stood there thinking, gee, I just wish I wasn't in this room. This is just horrible. And as a conflict point, she'd have been brilliant for a story, because everything was then in spite of her. But of course, you don't want to highlight that to the bride, who was thoroughly aware, by the way, Mum was hard work. But I was like, oh man, you can't use that conflict. Whereas weather or time, they're conflict points that can push people, but actually work for us. Yeah. So you can, especially weather, that is something everyone panics. We're British, we terrified of rain, aren't we? And the bad weather, even though that's what we've been brought up with, we're terrified of it. And that can really lend something to it, because ultimately there might be a break in the day, and that's your resolution to all that worry early on in the film. But you can create this sort of like mini drama through the story of your wedding with weather. You can't do that with photos. It's just a massive hindrance that's sort of making your life a lot harder. Whereas with ours, it's like, actually, give me something that I can work with here and make something of. And again, like the same with time, time, all right, it's a bit of a pressure on both sides, but when you're up against it, you're getting that sort of energy and that panic. That can be quite good for prep, to build like that tension, because eventually it's going to calm down and you're going to get that nice release before we then get the moment where, are we going to make it on time? Well, of course we are, because it doesn't matter whether we're half an hour late or not. For the purpose of the film, it happened on time. And you've got that element of storytelling that you can take from these challenges, whereas as a photographer, I found that those things just stress me out too much.
Literally.
Now I'm just like, oh great, like there's a bit of conflict that I can pull into this.
For the story.
Add that in the story, because like I said, that is the hardest thing at weddings, isn't it? You can't, you can have all that build up and the journey, if you like, in inverted commas, of prep and everything, but you can't kind of put an adversary in there. But you've just got more story opportunity, haven't you, with video, and you've got more. You decide almost what that story is. You'll look through the day and think, I like kind of what they've said in that bit of the speech, and that kind of ties in with some of the stuff I saw and heard during prep, so I can sort of build it around that, and that's quite nice then. It doesn't obviously happen at every wedding, but you've got a little bit more opportunity, whereas as a photographer, the story's happening in front of you, and you've got to make sure you're there to get that moment, because if you miss it, it's just regret then, isn't it? You don't get the opportunity to go back.
Exactly, and you have to capture everything as a photographer. Like, they're expecting you, everything needs to be documented to a certain extent. Yeah. So when I was a photographer, for example, I'll be there. There'll be points where I go, oh, I haven't got enough prep, or I haven't got enough of reception. I haven't got. As a videographer, I'm like, whatever's happening is what I've got. If for whatever reason I don't get enough prep, well, I don't need to feature that much of it in the film, and I'll look at a different way of editing and telling that story. And I kind of like that. I like it when things force me to do something differently, because it is with editing as well, it can be quite easy to fall into doing templates and almost becoming cookie cutter, because weddings by their nature or
templates
a certain way, right? And totally getting our kind of templates in place to give us structures for our edits to get us started. But I do like it when I'm forced out of that, when the day kind of throws those curveballs. So that's an element that was a big, massive stress and a big worry for photo becomes something awesome when you're in video.
You've turned it into a positive. It's funny. I found the films that are my better work are the days where perhaps something's not gone quite the way I thought it was, or it's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And it's forced me to do something else. Because I think, like you said, it's not cookie cutter, but the nature of a wedding is templated. It doesn't matter. I've done cheap weddings when I was new, and I've done a couple of big fancy ones that have spent a ton of money. They still follow the same format roughly through the day. So it's very easy then if you could just come back to your edit and go, well, it doesn't matter how much money we're spending, how big it was, it's still fundamentally the same thing. As soon as you lose a bit of it, I've got to go and find something better. And this happened at Thicket, one of the videos I put into Twitter, the Thicket Priory one. I missed groom prep. I said to them, come and get me before you do it. Don't start without us. Like, lovely groom and best man, dead nice. I said, just give us a shout. I said, I'm just going to bang the drone up. Yeah, I'll be 10 minutes. Stuck the drone up, 10 minutes, walked up, and he was in his suit. Like, nobody had come and got us. And I sort of walked in and was like, oh, no. I was like, I sort of wanted some of that. And then I thought, well, they got ready so early. It was like 2 hours before the ceremony. Well, they're going to do other stuff, because what are they going to do for 2 hours? So let's not worry about that. Let's get the other stuff. And in the end, that all worked. They went down and they got a bottle of whiskey that had been given as a gift that was dead expensive. And it was a bit... So it was like, I might not have been here for that. And, they've all poured it in cheers. And there was all these other guests were coming. And I'm like, I've had to go and replace what I lost, but ended up getting new stuff. Then I now go, next time, I wonder if some of these similar things might happen again. Have I been missing stuff because I've been too focused on getting what I think I need as opposed to what's happening? So it does kind of open your mind as well to like picking up and learning sort of like there's new things that you can go and film. But I always find where I've got a bit of adversity, the film's better if... I've often had it where I'm like, I'm smashing it today. Like everything's working for me. All my footage looks amazing. And then you sit down and you look on the screen, you're going, it's not quite as good as I remember. It's all right, but it's not as... And it's sometimes surprises you. The ones that you think, no, I didn't love that. You come back and you go, it's pretty solid stuff here.
Yeah.
Because you've just had to work a bit harder with it.
Yeah, you've been battling rather than falling into like a safety mode or like autopilot. You're actually forced to be creative and like kind of think outside the box a little bit. And then, that's when you get the interesting stuff, isn't it? And then you can create like a dynamic film.
And the best thing then is like, you remember that and it's something you've added to your armory. So that adversity then's improved you as well as and I suspect this is probably the same for photographers as well, like similar sort of things happen there. But you can't control people sometimes. Despite telling them don't go and get ready yet, give us 10-15 minutes. We're gonna be half an hour, and they came up and everyone's there, black ties all done and everything. I'm like,
God damn it. I'd probably tell him to like, can we go fake it by a window? that's my go-to.
Honest answer in that case, I said, can you take your jacket off and put your jacket back on by the window?
We love that, don't we?
So I did it.
2 angles with your bad boy.
2 angles of that. And I said to his best man, any chance, just take his cufflinks off and help him put them back on. And I thought, they will remember that wasn't real, probably. And if they do, it still looks quite nice. But I did feel like a full-on fraud. Like I have to, and again, I don't know why, because it's totally fine for me to take a clip from somewhere else and put it here and pretend that happened in the edit. But on the day, I felt like really bad.
Because they know, because they know.
Because they knew, because we stood there and I go, so could we just pretend get ready? And then the problem is when people pretend get ready, they always look at the camera, don't they? I was like, is this right?
Oh, yeah.
It's fine.
But it I feel like, that's one thing like again, coming from documentary photography, where the whole thing was you don't even move a bag for life, it's in the wrong spot. You leave everything, and all warts and all. It is what it is. We're pure documentary. Coming to video, and I started thinking, no, I can't be photoshopping stuff. I need to be literally getting hands on with the day and moving things. And I've kind of increased that level a little bit to the point now where I can be, I don't know, like for example, like with the grooms. So often I go to them and like, that they don't want to get in their suit yet because it's too early, and it's gonna, like, if it's a hot summer's day, and I'll just say to them, let's fake it, put it on quickly, we'll get your suit on,
and take it off
and take it off. And that was something I was really against, but I feel like the generation of bride and grooms we've got now are kind of all up for this, because I think it stems from the fact that they've grown up taking pictures themselves with selfies and stuff like that. People are a lot more aware of having their photo taken. For example, now pretty much every bride and quite a lot of grooms now have a favorite side they like to be on. Whereas when I started doing photo, that was not a thing at all. They didn't know anything about. They just didn't want their photo taken in general.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think the dynamic has changed. So they want you to almost set them up because they know how they like to be captured via camera. So they almost want to have it set up so that's how they look. So, and I feel that's fallen into how I can manipulate a day a little bit more now because they don't mind. They almost want it. And I do make a joke of it though. Say it's always the groom, to be fair, is the main one where I'm kind of faking it to a certain extent just to get it done quickly for them. I always make a joke going, "Oh, don't tell your wife that we faked this, right?" It's just like kind of, and I'm half hoping he doesn't as well, so she just think it's genuine. But at the same time, who stands by a window and looks out of it when they do a tie? You go to a mirror. So
I have this standing. It's not a joke, but I have the same line with every groom. I'm like, I send a thing out before the wedding, so like some top tips to like where to stand, knock the big light off. You know, we could try and find windows. And I always walk in and go, look, can you come and get ready near the window? I know like no normal human gets dressed in front of a window. But on a wedding day, I'm going to need you to be near the window.
Yeah.
And it's... So I've gone the exact same route that I wouldn't touch anything. And I think like the documentary photographers I've worked with, when I work with them now, they're like, who even are you? Like, you've changed, man. You know, like, who are you? But I think it's like, you're sort of looking going, I know this now looks good for both of us, and the photographer's not changed it, so I haven't breached their documentary rule. I've changed it, so they're still focusing what is done. But I know that if you're in better light, or if you're stood somewhere that I can get a better composition, or I can frame things just in a better way, I'm not averse to moving people. I will happily tidy a room up and sort it out, because... Like you've said, historically I could go in Photoshop and retouch stuff, and it's even easier now with the content aware. Not content aware. I'm showing my age again. The AI stuff now, we'll just get rid of it. But we don't have that yet. I think I saw something saying Premiere Pro's bringing this similar thing out. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But you kind of have to control things a bit more. And I think I was listening to. I don't know when this one's going to go out, but I was listening to. Is it Agna Harris?
Yes.
Last week, and she was talking about controlling the scene a little bit more, and it makes total sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can do it really subtly. You don't, you don't have to wade in and take over and like, this is all for me, darling. This is my art. It's none of that. You can just gently encourage people, and sometimes you'll have the odd groom that just will not stand by that window and they just don't want to be there. That's fine. I've asked twice. That's it. I'm just gonna work with what we've got. But most people, they, like you said, they get it now. They understand that they've paid a lot of money for us to be there. They want the film to look good. So they trust that we probably know how to make that work for them. So they do tend to go along with it.
Exactly. And they've paid for our expertise on top of everything else. And we can give them that advice. And I go so far now, like during a ceremony, I'll ask people to move. Like as in, I had one where it was a celebrant, and the celebrant stayed centre aisle and had the bride and groom off to the side, like you do. Do you know when they position them off to the side when people are giving readings? She did that, but then she told them to do their vows, and she was getting them to do it in the corner, and I was in the corner right by them because that's where I was like normally positioned. So I could never get a nice angle of these vows. So I literally, they were about to start, and I just asked them, "Can you move to the middle, please?" And like said it nicely. I was like, "Can you please move over?" And they went to the middle, and I got a beautiful shot down my aisle cam and that, and that was something that would have been like an anxiety dream I'd have had in my past days. Like I never would have asked people to move, but a split second asking that, they're never going to remember it, but it makes their film and their photos as well.
And
like
their photos,
The photographer would have had me rammed in a corner next to the bride and groom as he tried to get that shot. So I think the kind of progression I'm going at in terms of manipulating a day, I think I'm only one step away from taking a tin of paint to repaint a room that I'm not happy with, turn up to bridal prep, slap a bit of paint on that wall, knock a new window in so I had some window light.
In the end, it's almost like it can be better, so why wouldn't you improve it? It goes back to when I said the Instagram, I think it's marginally better, so I've gone for it. S-Log is better, so I should be doing it. I know I'm not at the minute. But it's the same thing here. If you just stood in that little bit of shadow during the ceremony, there's nothing wrong with encouraging them to come forward. Yeah. And it's how you do it, isn't it? Like
yes, that's it. That's it. Yeah, it's in the delivery of it.
And sometimes there's just no opportunity to do it, so you just sometimes have to suck it up. But generally, I'll have a word, like before ceremonies, I'll say, like, can you see on the floor? You see where it's lighter? Can you stand here? Don't stand in that dingy bit there. Stand here, or if it's a harsh bit of light, don't stand in there. Try and guide them a little bit so they are mindful of it, because I know they've got other things to think of, but you don't want them in like hot spots, do you, and stuff like that? Because obviously we just don't have the recovery that you would do with a photographer shooting in RAW. So it is sort of, you've got to manage it to make a better quality product for you, because ultimately that's what people see and buy from. But more importantly for your couple, isn't it? Because that's what they paid you to tell.
That is what it is. We want to give them the best product, don't we? That's why we do take these steps. But it's all in the delivery of it, because you don't want to make it sound like it's for your ego, like, and you want to boss people around. You like, it's all, well, would you mind, please, pretty please? And I always have like a kind of my chats with the registrars for like civil ceremonies. I feel bad because you're going up there and I'm like kind of listing off my demands, but they're not demands. It's always, it'd be awesome for the couple if you could do this. Like, it'd be so good for their film. It'd be wonderful if you could do this for me. And it's always kind of make sure they're in the middle of the aisle for me. And let me, and want them to, and when the readers come up, if they can have it, so whoever's giving the reading is kind of like center of the aisle. If the registrar can be stood off to the side slightly, so my rear camera can get bride and groom and them in it as well, because the context of talking. But I feel bad I got this list of things, like they just got to do their job, and then and I need to mic you up as well. But there's a way of doing it, isn't there? And if you're friendly, but also if they push back on anything, you'll be like, okay, yeah, cool. But it would be lovely for the couple if. It's such a powerful sentence. I
found big smile when you walk in. It's really hard to say no to somebody who's smiling. Like, it takes it is a real hard ass to turn around and go no when you're like really. I mean, I'm exactly the same. I have this whole like ridiculous charm offensive that's hidden behind this beaming smile of like me, But if my wife saw me, she'd probably divorce me, because it's so cringeworthily embarrassing how much. Oh God, I make myself sick inside, but then I sit and I think, but I'm just trying to achieve the best for the couple, and often you do need to sort of manage the registrars a little bit, because they sometimes have their own way of doing it, and they'll just stand where the hell they want. And I know that he's always going to be in front of one of my cameras that I need at that exact moment. That's just how it goes. So I try and the exact same thing, negotiate in. I've just found being super smiley and super nice tends to get there. It's even worked in churches, which it never used to, but I've had 100% strike rate with churches since, I probably only do like 2 a year out of the 30, but they've let me mic them up and pretty much stand where I want, and the last few I've done, because I've been super nice. But when I work with certain photographers I work with, they just look at me and they shake their head like,
here he goes.
You've got kids. I'm just...
So have some respect of yourself, man. The worst bit is as well, where you often, like especially when I'm doing my charm offensive, I've got my mic pre-recording ready to put on. So I've got audio evidence of this just horrible little pantomime I'm going through. Yeah. But one top tip I'll give everybody: call the registrars by their first name. They've got their name literally on their name badge usually. When you're asking anything of a person, if you can say their first name when you're saying it, it goes a long way, doesn't it?
It's a basic psychology thing, isn't it? Like it's
usually Debbie. Let's be honest.
It's usually
Debbie or June.
If you can Debbie or June, we've got loads of Junes up here. If you can do it, whatever it is, people instantly warm to you more when you use your name, and you've got more on your side. So it's just the little basics like that help. So, but again, if you're coming from a photography background, you should have fairly well honed this, because this is something this is a skill you should be. It's like you're developing that as you work all the way through. I think that the big thing that photographers probably get is horrible is editing. When I said learning manual focus, I was thinking about that and going, no, editing's really hard as well. That was a tricky thing to learn. So there is that whole thing as well for them to come in and like suddenly pick up a Final Cut or DaVinci or Premiere and try and figure out what the hell this is. But like just the skills, a lot of the skills you've already got in there, and even the editing skills. If you come from Lightroom and you say, for example, go into Premiere, it does kind of feel similar. So there's a lot that you're already like set up to do, but there's there's a few things you're going to need to fine tune.
Yeah, the editing, I don't think there's any shortcut to that apart from maybe getting mentoring for that, or because I think basically you need footage to be able to learn editing. To be learning editing, you need footage to be cutting. So it's just a case of getting out there, shooting something, and then trying to put it together. And but I feel with editing in its nature is quite intuitive, because the way you put a story together, it feels quite organic, because we're so used to seeing TV and how things are put together in movies, and that's basically what we're doing. You've got, you're progressing from A to B in the story, and the way a story goes, like father bride talks about daughter, well, put that at the start during bridal prep. Like there's a ceremony section, the vows that lands there. After that, you've got kind of reception party. That's where you can put some of the more fun things that a best man says. Where there's a dip in a song, something emotional, or at the end of the film, that's where you put what the groom says. It kind of logically makes sense, doesn't it?
Sort of logically, it does. And then once you've cracked that, then you can start to sort of play about and try doing something a bit more different, abstract, and you'll get it. The beauty of editing, that Walcott Hall film that I shot before I was mentored, that sounded really serious, didn't it? I edited that and put that out, and I thought it was a decent film. And then at the end of the 12 months with Jeff, he was like, right, go and recut that. And I went back and I recut the exact footage again and got a completely different film.
Really?
It was vastly superior, the second one, because obviously I'd learnt a lot more. But there's no hard and fast rule. If you're doing something that sucks and you're halfway through it, it does stink to start again, but you can start again, and that's part of the learning curve as well. You're going to have like edits as a photographer where coming from photography to video that you're doing and you're like, this is awful. It's not what I thought it was going to be in my head. But you can start again using the same footage. You'll make something that feels totally different. Whereas when you're editing photos, if it's not quite got it right in camera, there's not a ton of leeway, to change that. Whereas for us, like I said, that example I had, the two films were night and day. Because I tried to like make it emotional in the first one, but by like featuring the bit where we talked about a dead mum. Just like,
I've done that before. I've
been
too hard on a dead dad before.
Oh, dead mum. And Jeff was like, I see what you're doing, but it's quite like negative for a wedding.
Yeah.
And then like when I recut it, the groom was like, he'd done really like told really great story about how they met, and like he'd been a bit of a douche, not a douche, but he's kind of like she blowed him off a bit, and then they bumped into it. He told this like how he contacted her on Messenger, and like it was a funny story, and I'm like, that makes sense to start it with. It's light, everyone's laughing, it's and then you could reference mum with a photo then part way through, she's in the film, but it wasn't as leaden as like, you're going to be emotional because mum's passed away, so boom, get that nail smashed in.
Here's a reminder of your dead mum every time you watch your wedding film.
Yeah, it was a bit like, oh yeah, that's... So you can change things and go back, and sometimes I'll pick up a film that I've even done like 6 months ago and go, I didn't like, it wasn't sitting right with me. And I'll tweak it and I'll change something. I'll be like, I know I've got that better now. Do I give it to the couple? But
yeah, sorry, I sent you the shit version. Here's the better one.
That Walcott Hall one
film that Jeff made you recut. Had you delivered it?
Yeah, I delivered it. Oh, it's like a year before, and they loved it. They were like, they thought they loved it, and then I recut it, and I don't know how it went out there. It was a 9 dots thing. Jeff was on. Do you remember when they did? I think it was called like Motion or something like that. It was before Roo became the de facto king of wedding, all things wedding video. They did like a Motion
online
thing.
one, wasn't it? An online.
Yeah. And Jeff went on that, and he asked me to come on to be like an example of someone that he'd mentored, and we used that film as a before and after on it. And I think that went out onto the internet for a short while or something like that. It was available anyway, and the bride saw it. Don't know how. I didn't know the bride was big into
that. Would be weird, wouldn't it? You find a director's edit of your own wedding film.
She saw it and she was like, "Oh my god, that's amazing! Can we have it?" So I was like, "Yeah, of course you can." Sent it to her.
No,
Can I have another 500 quid for it? So I gave her that, and she's like, she just loves both versions, but the second one was better. But when I tweak them, sometimes that's the one that I like re-upload to Vimeo for my website.
Yeah.
I'll generally, if it's a minor tweak, I'll leave the couples because I don't want them watching going, that feels different. And because they might prefer, they'll got used to that version, won't they? So,
yeah. If you were a photographer now looking to move over into video, the landscape has changed a little bit from when we moved over, hasn't it? But if you were looking to make those steps now, what steps would you take to transition into video?
I think I'd go back to what I'm doing. I'd contact some of your photographer friends and get some freebie weddings because you might hate it. You could go into it, you could shoot, you might enjoy shooting and despise editing, or you might not enjoy shooting it in a different way. You need to have that. Like you said, you can't even practice the editing until you've got some footage. So you've just got to go to a wedding, shoot what you think you're going to need, come back, try and edit it. You'll learn so much from that first one about what you didn't need that you've overshot, what you did need that you didn't shoot. Go again. And it'll be 3, 4, 5 weddings before you'll start to figure out where you're at. That's the point then that you need to start thinking about going and getting somebody to properly teach you some of the, filling in those blanks that you'll fill in over 3 years, but fill it in 6, 12 months. Practicing on manual focus, practicing on even autofocus. There's still a skill to, if you're filming on autofocus, it's not easy, is it? It isn't just touching the screen. There's an art form to doing that. So whichever way you decide to go down that route, you need to put some proper yards in. Because when you're then turning up on the wedding day, it happens quite quick. You've got to be on it, otherwise you've missed it. And in the same way as photography, you ain't going back and doing many of the key parts. Don't worry too much about watching what other people are doing, because that can sometimes be off-putting. Because oh my god, I'll never be as good as they are. But it doesn't hurt to watch some other wedding films to get an idea of the type of stuff you need to be shooting, because there is stuff that you're going to need. You're going to need a lot more movement. You're going to need a lot more transitioning. So when you're going from one place to another, it needs to, in your film, it needs to make sense that you're suddenly here and now you're here. Well, how did that happen?
Yeah.
And if you can't show how that happened, then you need to start thinking about things like match cuts, where two things similar happen. So there'll be a door shut, you could open the door and the next thing. It doesn't matter if in a different location, but the doors kind of hinge the two things together, or, movement or something. But you need to figure out some of those quirks that will help you progress the story without it jarring, if that makes sense. Because I think that's one of the trickier things. You don't want your footage to jar. You go whoa, that feels really awkward. And that's a bit of an art form that takes quite a while to comprehend as a photographer, because you never had that issue before. You could just move from the ceremony room to the group photos and no one cares. The days just progress. But with video, well, 1 minute we're inside and next minute we're outside, but what happened in between? You almost sometimes need to piece those bits together. So it's thinking a bit more like that. So changing your mindset, that's a big part. When I did the workshop, was mindset's such a huge part of transitioning over, just starting to think differently, think like basically a filmmaker, really. If I'm going to be here and that's going to be here, what would I need to see for that to make sense? And once you think like that, it starts to become a lot more straightforward. But at first it's kind of alien, because you've never had to think about that before. You just had to worry why you're doing those bloody group shots when it's raining. That's been your biggest problem.
Yeah. And like I say, I recommend, I feel every photographer is going to have to dabble in video a little bit. I think it's just going to kind of be expected with how we're moving, with how people consume content, basically. It's moving very much towards video. So I feel everyone should dabble to a certain extent, but I think everyone has the skill set to be an amazing videographer if they're a photographer. And I feel like the transition from photo to video is a lot easier than actually going from a videographer to a photographer, I feel. I think because there's a whole lot more kind of the social side of it that you need to learn to be a photographer, and controlling the day, which is something that's not kind of is harder to pick up. Whereas a photographer taking that skill set into video is phenomenal. And then you get the extra headspace being a videographer, where you've no longer got your brain clouded by all the worries of a photographer. When you move to video, you can be more creative with it.
I mean, again, it'll depend on your background, where you come from. Obviously, controlling a crowd for me was not a problem, because I'd done
being a copper,
international football matches at Old Trafford, and large scale riots and stuff like that. Not riots, but large scale protests and stuff like that. So for me, being able to manage that was straightforward, and I could probably slip back to that tomorrow. But some people, that to them is that would be horrifying. And I think if you are switching over to photos, you've got to be mindful that you are going to be a lot more, they're going to be looking at you to lead things a lot more, and you kind of have to step up a little bit for that. So if you're a photographer coming over, enjoy the relaxing, casual, eat your sandwich 20 minutes before the speeches. Yeah, eat your canapes. It's until it gets to until you screw your audio up, and then you'll know stress. Then once you've screwed your audio, you the ball, it's kind of equal then, isn't it? Like that stress level.
We will have to go through that. We have to go through that dodgy audio wedding or few.
when you pick your Sony up and the red light's not on, and you think, oh.
Yeah, still film my feet for at least 4 minutes every wedding for some reason, and then lift my camera up for a good composition, and it gets turned off because I found myself in the opposite.
It's the doom loop, I call it.
Doom loop.
No matter how the doom loop, no matter how often you do it, you put it in the editing timeline, and then suddenly it's just a series of feet coming up, and you go, "Oh no, that was a good shot. Yeah, I didn't get that. Here's more feet." Another good, yeah, I didn't get that. And it's just, how long has this gone on for? Please tell me this wasn't like an hour.
Know, right? Comes up to the entire ceremony is your feet.
Yeah, you just like, and it will happen. Again, that's another thing. You just gotta you're gonna make these mistakes. Even when you're like, I don't know how many years you've been doing it, 10, 12 years. I'd make a mistake every single wedding. But you just, redundancy, spare kit of everything, spare audio, all that, just mitigate against your own mistakes. And 9 times out of 10 you'll get away with it.
I've kept you for a long time, mate, so let's round off with the last question, and it's the question that I like to ask everybody, and it's, what were the biggest light bulb moments in your career so far when something suddenly made sense and helped you progress or find a path that you wanted to take?
For me, this was probably a little more philosophical than actually sort of like wedding equipment-y, or like, it wasn't the mentoring or anything, because I felt like they were all like obvious things to do, like, pay somebody to learn and everything. For me, the biggest moment when I sort of realised, and it changed everything, was when I started as a photographer, I used to compare myself to everybody else. I'm competitive by nature. I think, we all do this. We all look at what everybody else is doing, or we all at some point have looked at what everybody else is doing. And there's always somebody doing better. There's always somebody probably charging more. There's always somebody shooting what I perceive to be better weddings. And you're always going to convince yourself that you're failing. Like, I'm not at the same level. I'm not progressed as quickly. I started when they started, and they've done all this cool stuff, and I've not done it. And I was terrible for that. I would compete with people I'd never met who had no idea they were in competition with me. And I'd be beating myself up that it wasn't going right. And I moved to video, and I had that little period where it was all new and shiny and it didn't matter. And I started to do the same again. I was looking at everybody else that was shooting videos and, oh my God, mine aren't this good, mine aren't that good. I'm not shooting at this venue. I haven't shot that. I'm not charging enough money. And I'm adding all this pressure to myself. And then I just almost like one day had this, it was not that long ago. It's like 6-7 months ago. I had this like sort of almost epiphany, this like the light bulb moment, if you like. There was like, none of this matters. Like, you're competing with people who are in a completely different set of circumstances to you. There's people who want to shoot 100 weddings a year. As we know from this podcast, there's some people that can shoot 100 weddings a year and be financially very secure from it. There's some people that will only need to shoot 5 weddings or 10 weddings a year because either they've got a solid income elsewhere, or they have a partner that's got a really good income. So they can charge more because the pressure's not on. They only need 5 weddings. They can charge more. You're looking going, oh my God, we started at the same time and they're charging 6 times what I'm charging. But your pressure's different because you're a husband and wife team that has to pay all the bills. And you need to get 40 weddings a year to make sure your mortgage can get paid. So your pressure's different. We're not all competing on a level playing field. We're all different sized boats in the same sea. And we've all got different needs and different targets and different challenges. And ultimately, once I realised the only person I'm competing with is myself, and that is that I have to do a better job than I did last week, and I have to do a better job the week after, and I have to make sure every single time I go to a wedding I do something better and I improve and I take myself to that higher level. Once I realised that's the only competition that I've got, to beat last time's wedding, to be better than that, it then took a ton of pressure off. And suddenly I realised, it's not that important to compete with people who probably have no idea that you're comparing yourself to them, because we all do it. We've all gone on, particularly Instagram now. The nature of social media is sort of saying to you, your life is inadequate. You should be doing this to be this. That's the nature of social media. And maybe it's because I'm ticking towards my more senior 40s. 50 isn't a million miles away. I'm perhaps becoming a touch more philosophical about it. But I know there's other people in this industry that are like sort of not mentally struggling with it, but it's additional battle that's adding something to them. You're being told if you're not shooting that, Italian wedding with Americans, then you failed. Well, that's not true, is it? If you look, my wife, I said this to my wife, and I think possibly the best example of it was the Northwest Wedding Industry Awards last night, and a couple of years ago I won it, and last night I didn't win it. I didn't take anything from it, no highly commended or anything. And it's easy to sit there going, oh, what's gone wrong? And yet she just went, look where you were 5 years ago. Would you have taken where you are now when you started? And it was that simple moment of going, yeah, of course I would. Like, of course I would, because I'm charging good money. I've got solid base of clients. I like the weddings that I'm doing. She was like, so don't worry about it. I even sort of had to check myself, because I know this, but I was a bit like, oh, what have I done wrong? Why didn't it work as well? And it's like, it's different. Like the judges preferred different films. That's fine. That's how life is. And these are the rules that you're setting yourself up to sort of live with elsewhere. I'm reminding myself, and I was like, yeah, it's fine. So it's all right. It's cool. Yeah. And it's the exact same thing. We're going to look at, if you look at people shooting these 10 grand weddings, and we're being told on Instagram, you need to be shooting these 10 grand weddings or you're not succeeding as a wedding videographer. There's only so many of them going around. We can't all shoot it. We can't all be flying out to Italy or America or wherever these amazing jobs are every weekend, because there aren't enough of them to do it. But there are tons of weddings in the, 2,000, 3,000 market that are great weddings, great clients. They're an hour from your home. You're back in time for match of the day. I can take my daughter to watch her play netball every Sunday. I'm not sat in an airport lounge or driving up the M1. Because when I get to when my kids have grown up and moved out, am I going to look back to that time that I was driving back from France and my flight was delayed and I was just like, oh God, I just want to get home, and I've missed seeing my family for 4 days? Or am I going to think back to like when my kid played well at netball last week, and I've seen her develop and improve and how she's enjoying it, and those things they're what matter. And I think it's really easy to get wrapped up into being told what you should be aspiring to and not stopping and looking at where you've got, because we all took a chance, we all quit jobs, we all set a business up, and if you're making money and you're making enough to get what you need to survive day to day, then you've succeeded. That's success. And we'll all have aspirations. I want to, I'd love to win another Northwest Award. I'd like to get that big fancy wedding in Italy. But if I had to settle for what I've got now, I'd be dead happy with that, because there's a ton of other videographers that look at what I've got and be like, oh my God, I'd love to have what you've got. And I think the moment when I could rationalize that and handle any disappointment or any sort of comparisons I had and go, do you know, I'm pretty good. That's the moment that I had the light bulb that sort of made doing what we do a lot easier. And that's a very long, philosophically fluffy answer, isn't it? But
it was absolutely perfect, mate. And it's such a great thing for people to hear, and it is so important. So thank you so much, James. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your insight and your knowledge. If you have enjoyed this episode and wouldn't mind helping us out, please leave a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts.